Welcome to the third meeting in the Canadian Multistakeholder Process to secure the Internet of Things. For those of you who don't know, I'm Tom Stark. I'm the project manager for this initiative. I'm with the Internet Society. Very quickly, before we start, I have a few housekeeping items. There is coffee and beverages at the end of the hall, and there's refreshments over in the corner, so if you're hungry, please feel free. This event will be live streamed, so this is your last chance to run and hide if you don't want to be on the internet. There'll be a reception after at the end of the hall from 5 to 7. We're using the hashtag secure IoT 2018, so if you want to tweet, please feel free. And for those of you who have been involved with this process so far, as you can tell, Andrew is not here. Martin Boderman will be taking over for him. This is actually the first week where Andrew is taking over as CEO for ISOC, so he's very, very busy. He will be involved with this process ongoing, but for today he's not with us. But Martin Boderman, he's actually joining us from the Netherlands, and he's a veteran in multi-stakeholder processes through ICANN and other venues and initiatives. So yeah, he will do great. And with that, we can start. So today, we're going to begin with a guest speaker. Dr. Ann Cavoukian is the distinguished expert in residence at the Privacy by Design Center of Excellence at Ryerson University, just down the road. She's also the former Information and Privacy Commissioner for the province of Ontario, and today she'll be presenting on privacy by design. So join me in welcoming Ann.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to go really quickly because I only have 15 minutes and I have way too many slides. So they're available for you later on if you have any interest. But whenever I have a captive audience, I always want to start by dispelling the myths because there are so many myths. And let me make it really quick. Privacy is not about security. It drives me crazy when people say, well, you know, if you got nothing to hide, what's the problem? The problem is that could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich because it's predicated on the fact that the government has a right to access all your information, and as long as you're a law-abiding citizen, what's the problem? The problem is that's not what freedom is about. Freedom is about you deciding how you want your information used. Privacy is all about control. Personal control relating to the uses of your personal information. You see, context is key. Only you know if some information is sensitive or not. You want to give away your information, be my guest. Privacy is not a religion, as long as you make the decision to release it. It really makes a huge difference. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination. I love that term. It should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And it's no accident that Germany is the leading privacy and data protection country in the world. It's no accident they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich and the complete cessation of their privacy and their freedom. And when that ended, they said, never again. Never again will we allow the state to strip ourselves of freedom and privacy. And they've stood by that over all the years. I'm going to talk to you about privacy by design today. This is something I developed a long time ago, late 90s, I think at my first term as privacy commissioner. It's really taken off lately. I'll tell you about the GDPR, which some of you may already be familiar with. But in 2010, it was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. Commissioners have a conference once a year. It's usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day conference, we have a half-day session where we vote on resolutions. And I advanced the resolution that privacy should be proactively protected by design in all of our operations. Bake it into the code, bake it into the data architecture, make it an essential feature of what you're offering. That way, you can prevent the privacy harms from arising and avoid the necessity of dealing with regulation, which comes after the fact. And what surprised me was that it was unanimously passed by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities, because most commissioners are, I'm not a lawyer, they're what I call lawyers. They love drilling down into Section 29, Sub 2, Part A, and applying it to the fact situation, getting a resolution, which is very important. But when I spoke to them afterwards and I said, I'm surprised everyone voted in favor of this, they said what I knew in my heart. We were only seeing the tip of the iceberg. As commissioners, we were no longer able to address the majority of the privacy harms out there. In this day and age of ubiquitous computing, massive online connectivity, social media abounding, we didn't have a hope in hell of addressing all the privacy harms. So why not deal with a model of prevention, much like a medical model of prevention? You want to prevent the harms from arising and avoid all the regulatory hassles that come afterwards. Make it such that you can embed privacy into your operations directly, into the design, bake it into the code if you can. We've had great success with this. It's been translated into 40 languages, so it has a real global presence. And there are two essentials to privacy by design. One is you've got to be proactive. Think of it beforehand, embed it into your operations. You want to avoid the harms. The second is get rid of zero-sum models. The world is populated by zero-sum either-or models. You can have privacy or innovation, privacy versus security, privacy versus data utility. Zero-sum just means you can only have a positive gain in one area, always to the detriment of the other, so that the two total to a sum of zero. And in my world, it was never privacy that gained over the other interests, nor should it be. But I sure as heck wasn't going to let it fall all the time because you had this unbelievable view that it can only be one versus the other. That is such flawed logic. And I've spoken to many, many computer scientists, data engineers, etc., and said, I want you to do both. I want you to give me a positive sum model. You can have two positive gains in two areas at the same time. Privacy and innovation, privacy and security, privacy and data analytics. Can you do that? Every single scientist, engineer, everyone I spoke to said, of course we can do that. You know, we're smart. They're confident. That's what you need. They said, we're not the problem. The problem is we get asked to write the code for some program. We write it, we deliver it. And then somebody at that point says, can you bolt on a privacy solution after the fact? And they said, give me a break. We do what we can. It's never going to be as good as if it was seamlessly integrated into all the operations. So that's what I'm asking you to do today. Abandon the false dichotomy of one versus the other, and embrace positive sum win-win models that deliver on multiple objectives at the same time. I don't have time to go through the 7 foundational principles which form privacy by design. I've covered a few of them. I'm going to talk about privacy as the default setting for a moment. That is probably the hardest but the most important thing. Privacy as the default says you don't expect customers or citizens to go through all of the legalese in the terms of service and wade through the privacy policy until they find the opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any other purpose other than the intended primary purpose of the data collection. Nobody does that. Who has time to do that? Life is short. We don't do that. But that doesn't mean people don't care about privacy. Concern for privacy is at an all-time high. I've been in this business a long time, well over 20 years. For the first time in the last 2 years, concern for privacy in public opinion polls like Pew Internet Research, etc., has been at the 90 percentile consistently. 91% of those polled expressed great concern over their privacy. 92% expressed concern over the loss of control over their personal information. This is really important. We have a trust deficit right now, huge concern for privacy. And we can rectify this by following privacy by design. And just in case you think, well, this kind of sounds interesting, but it's just like an academic exercise, right? It won't work on the ground in the real world. Yes, it does. In, I think this was my second or third term, my third term as privacy commissioner, we did one paper which compiled the 22 papers we had written with all of the leading tech companies in the world to show that you can embed privacy into design. Think of any major tech company, Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM, of course, and I'm forgetting a bunch of them. We did papers on all these areas to show that yes, in fact, you can embed privacy protective measures and security into these operations proactively so that you make it a win-win. I'll tell you just one example. I remember with Intel, we worked on remote home health care. With the aging demographics of our baby boomers and the population, a lot of elderly people live alone and they want to stay in their homes as they're getting older. but they may need some help from time to time. So Intel developed these great sensors that you can attach to. For example, you can attach a sensor on someone's bed. And let's say they get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, but they don't return within a predetermined period of time. The alarm goes off, help comes. And this is all with the positive express consent of the individuals, of course. But the beauty of it was, with the wireless communications that are sent off from the sensors are encrypted. They only go to pre-identified people who have been agreed upon by the individual. Everything was embedded into the design of the operations. It wins beautifully. People get to stay in their homes longer and get the help they need if they need help. It's all about making it win-win. I'm going to go really quickly. There's a new law that just came into effect in the European Union, the General Data Protection Regulation, in May of this year. For the first time ever, it includes privacy by design actually in the law, and privacy as the default, which is the second foundational principle that I mentioned to you. See, privacy as the default says you don't have to ask people if they want privacy. You give it to them automatically as the default. You tell people, we're only going to use your information for the primary purpose intended. And if that's acceptable to you, from time to time we may come to you and ask for your express consent for a secondary use that might come down the road. But unless we get your express consent, we won't use your information for any purpose other than the intended purpose. It's automatic. We give you privacy automatically. You don't have to ask for it. Unbelievable. Raises the bar dramatically on privacy. It's now included in this huge new law, the General Data Protection Regulation, in the EU, which has just passed. So Canada, for the first time ever, we are no longer adequate. Our laws have always been considered adequate to the EU laws as opposed to the US. For the first time ever, we do not have adequacy. So what did the Privacy Commissioner of Canada do last year? Went to the federal government and said, we need to upgrade our law. PIPEDA, dated early 2000s, and we need to add privacy by design in it. So in March of this year, the Committee on Ethics, Privacy, and Access, they came out with a report. This is the heading, Towards Privacy by Design. So I think you'll be seeing privacy by design added to the law later in the year. And I'm going to go really quickly because I've been told I have 5 minutes left. I'm going to tell you all about IoT. And this is the GDPR law. I'm going to go really quickly. Here's what I need you to know about IoT. Oh, and I did not say this, let me be clear, but Information Age said that if you, it's not too much of a stretch that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. As I said, I did not say that, but they said that, which gives you an idea why privacy by design will elevate what you're doing, and which is why so many companies are coming to me now seeking privacy by design certification, which I'm now offering in partnership with KPMG. We are not going to have much time to talk about IoT, but you need to know that IoT is huge and that the concerns for privacy are enormous because they're basically non-existent. In the European Union, you have the working group, Article 29 Working Party, and they've said that if you want to have privacy and security in Internet of Things, follow privacy by design. See, the problem with IoT, and let me be clear, I am very pro-tech, pro-connected devices, pro-everything, provided that they think proactively and embed much-needed privacy and security measures into the design of the operations of the IoT and connected devices. You think they're doing that? They're not doing that. Maybe somebody is doing it, and I'd love to hear about it. If you know IoT is doing it, please come and tell me. But most of what I see is this stuff is flying out the door like the Wild West, a lot of excitement about it, I get that, but then they're going to be faced with lawsuits, and they're no longer lawsuits, class action lawsuits, when all the data breaches start flowing in, which they've already started. So please, get smart, embed privacy and security into IoT from the outset. You will make everyone happy. The Privacy Commissioner of Canada will like what you're doing, and as will this committee, and it will make it better for you. You see, I want you to win in terms of gaining a competitive advantage at a business level by embedding privacy and security into your operations. That's, to me, the win of privacy by design. You gain a competitive advantage, and your customers will love you for it. I have worked on this for many years. Companies that do this, they shout it from the rooftops because they want their customers to know the lengths they're going to respect their customers' privacy. And they get rewarded by having a very trusted business relationship, with which right now is virtually non-existent in most companies because there's a real trust deficit. I am just going to flit through these slides. You can have, if you want copies of these slides, of course they're available to you. And I'm just going through very quickly. I'll give you this one example with health apps. In the U.S., the Federal Trade Commission looked at 12 health apps. And they found that of the 12 they looked at, there were 76. Is it 76? Yeah. So it was flowing out, the information was flowing out to 76 parties, unknown, without the consent of the data subjects or the individuals involved. That's just one example. And I am going to flit because I now have 1 minute left. Just know that the Federal Trade Commission said embed privacy by design. You should be doing this. It will help you make privacy and security the default setting. So you can take a look. The FTC has done reports on the Internet of Things. There's a lot out there. The bottom line is that you have to embed privacy and security into IoT, mobile devices, etc. And if you do that, you will have an enormous gain because privacy is indeed good for business. Even when I was a privacy commissioner, believe it or not, this is a slide I took from the time when I was privacy commissioner. I want you to view privacy as a business issue, not an issue of regulatory compliance. Because if you just treat it as a regulatory compliance issue, you can do the minimum possible to be compliant. I want you to do way more than that. If you think of it as a business issue that's going to give you greater prosperity and innovation, it's going to be a win-win for your operations, for your customers, you're going to do a better job. So that's what I want you to do and gain a competitive advantage. And if you have any interest, I offer an online course on privacy by design. Let me end, ladies and gentlemen, by just asking you to consider, before the device is walking out the door, embedding much needed privacy protective measures into your operations, into IoT, into devices, and you will have great wins by doing that, and you will avoid the regulator knocking on your door, which I think is the best outcome. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions, because we don't have time right now.
Thanks so much, Anne.
I tweet every morning between 5:30 and 6 a.m. the latest privacy stories of the day. My husband is a saint.
And with that, I'll hand it off to our facilitator, Martin Boderman.
Thanks. The good news about tweets is that at 9 o'clock they're still there. So you don't need to read them between 5:30 and 6 o'clock. Thank you very much. Impressive, and I think a very good introduction to what we are here to further with. We are to build on the results that we've been developing so far. Part of this is really to get IoT security right, but part of this is also to do it very much in a multi-stakeholder way that works for us, that we feel good with. And for that, I would like to start this session also with reminding you to what we have agreed during the first meeting on, so what does this mean, multi-stakeholder rules of engagement. Many of you will remember them by heart, but for just in case not everybody has that, I've written them down there. The number one rule is to treat people with respect. And the second is, for those of you who tend not to speak up, please do, be proactive. For those of you who talk all the time, please practice your active listening tools. I know you have those too. To progress the debate, it's also very important that we stay on the topic, so we're not all over the place all the time. Be concise, be clear, and stay on topic. So I think you use that as well. It's very much a style of debate. Don't start with saying no. Often that's not even what you mean. It's about, yes, I've heard you, and I want to add this, or and I want to challenge that. And in order to keep the discussion flowing, when necessary, raise your hands and don't interrupt others. If you have any conflicts of interest, please declare them beforehand. And that goes throughout the process. The project manager would be there to receive those at any point in time. Conflict of interest doesn't mean we don't want you in this process. We just want you to be clear about it and not abuse your position. As such, just know that it's not only about numbers. We talk about impact on the future, which means that views are at least as important. And to progress things, once we've taken decisions on something that we agree on, that we have consensus on, as a group, only challenge those if there's new facts, if there are new facts coming. That's the only way. Otherwise we continue to go back and in loops. We don't want that. Now, consensus, what is that? Is that we all agree and all are enthusiastic about the outcome of the discussion? Not necessarily. But it does mean that the argument is over, that all the dissenting views are heard as well, and that by far the majority agrees, and at least there's nobody anymore who can't live with it. So the terms globally used for this is rough consensus, an ITF term, that helps to come to agreement and progress on things even when not everybody is enthusiastic. Now, these rules have been put on the table. Is there any of those rules you would like to challenge now? Because this is a multi-stakeholder process. I'm very open to that. Tom? No? Good. Then we'll take it from here. So what we're here to do today, and thank you for coming and joining us, is we've developed 3 working streams. One on education, one on labeling, and one on the network resilience. And what we're going to hear here from volunteers who've taken the lead in those discussions is where those discussions stand. And we want to explore with you what you think of that and where we should take it from here. This process is meant to lead to firm results, a good understanding of how to move ahead by April next year. The next physical meeting is planned for the 20th of November this year. And so I want to keep you to keep in mind, so for what do we need to do to get there? And please bring in your suggestions on that aspect as well. So having said that, and without further ado, I would think that it's time to start to talk about the streams. And I'd like to invite Ruba to take us through the work so far on consumer education. So.
Hi everyone. Okay, well, thank you very much for coming and being with us here, and for your interest in the consumer education part. We're going to be having and opening this discussion so that we can learn from each other today. Just to recap a little bit, so I put you in the picture where we stand. On August 15, the Consumer Education and Awareness Working Group, they agreed to meet for the first time. We met some in the same room, some were just streamed. And the idea was for the group, the Consumer Education Group, to come together and start discussing some of the key messages, how we are going to organize these key messages, and how we are going to work forward to prepare for this meeting. So the group had agreed primarily to divide these key messages over certain categories. So there are 3 main categories that we kind of primarily agreed on. The first one is privacy. That's very important, so thank you, Dr. Kavorka, for that. Then we have the second one is on security, and the third one is on functionality. And I'll let you know for each one later on what we mean by privacy, security, and functionality. But I want to also give you the overview of also how we subdivided these. So we are looking at these 3 categories over 3 periods of time. As a consumer, we want to help the consumer, educate the consumer, or raise the awareness before they buy the device, the IoT device. After they have the IoT device, so now they have it, what can they do with it? And then at problems. So they are facing a problem with either their privacy or with their security or with their functionality of the device. What can they do? These messages that we are trying to develop, we would like to assess them to ensure that they address the devices that we are talking about. So what devices are we talking about here, to narrow it down the scope, as well as the audience. We haven't yet reach a complete, full agreement on what the audience are that we want to address. But that's why we are here. We are here to hear from each other and develop that further. But the most important thing is as well the devices themselves. And there was also a preliminary agreement to narrow the scope. So we are not, I'll tell you, I know you don't like the not part, do not, but okay. What we are going to focus on mostly is those IoT devices that are either home or business-based IoT devices. So we are not really going to tackle the aviation or the car, automated vehicle, for example, because there are those who are working on these security measures, and they are working on the technology part of it and the regulatory part of it. So we're looking at these small devices. We haven't also yet reached an agreement on what to call them, whether they are not really low security, because it depends on the context. That's what we understand here from our colleagues who deal with security. For now, maybe we can just term them as dumb devices. Thermometers in the house, refrigerators that are embedding IoT in them, as well as things such as what we have also, TVs. There are so many IoT devices, wearable, for example. These are other things that we could be looking at. So that's a way to just limit a bit the scope of it. Oh, is there a clicker that I'm not clicking? I think I should be clicking on something.
I'm sorry. I took it.
So this one,
Green button.
the green. Okay, great. Sorry, that's where I was. So I was almost at the end there. So I would say the objective, really, if we want to look just at the objective of this meeting, would be mainly twofold. If we can get to that, I would be very happy to be able to report that. So the first thing is to leverage the expertise. So we have many expertise here in the room. If we can leverage that expertise to help us to narrow down these key messages, to refine them, identify them, assess them, that's one great objective that we will come out from this meeting. The second one is to provide an initial assessment and consolidation of these key messages. So if we can also do that by drafting key messages that are simple, that we can share with the consumer, because as we have heard from Dr. Kavier, you don't want so many like pages on privacy. When the consumer wants a quick know-how, like messages, here's what you have to do, here's what, so we have to filter kind of through these messages to make it as simple as possible for a consumer. And for that reason, I'm going to share with you at the moment kind of a table that we came up with that is divided over the potential themes of key messages. And I say potential because they are not yet the key messages. We are just coming up with questions that are important with language that we would like, issues or areas that we would like to address, as well as the categories. So the categories you can see, we are looking at the mic. Okay, privacy, security, and functionality. So for the privacy, we also have divided it over the bottom one, okay. So we have divided over before purchase, after purchase, and at problem. I suggest maybe take our time to go over each one. So for example, for privacy, we'll have some of these key messages and what you think about them, to process them together and go over them to see if we can refine them further. And then after purchase and at problem. So if you, yes?
Who is going to be reviewing the reading and understanding? That's for the individuals, the data subjects?
Do we need microphones?
Yeah, we need, if we're gonna speak, please.
So you mean who is going to assess what key messages are the best?
Who is that directed at?
This is it is directed for the consumer. So for us, this working group.
To do all that.
Well, that's the thing. There is a link here between the consumer will have to understand that they have a part on themselves to do, to educate themselves, to know what they, but we are also facilitating. We are kind of guiding them. We're trying to help them to find that information, to know where this information can help them, or to facilitate their understanding of the issues. Before I start on each one, for the privacy, I want to point out that, how do I go back? Red? Okay. So for, that one. Okay, so for the privacy one, we haven't yet had, this is important to note, that we don't yet have key messages that are director approved. We are still in the process of talking to officials, talk to everyone from the government, and as well as the stakeholders to see their opinion. And the same is for security. However, we are a little bit more advancing on the functionality, in the sense that we have some messages so far, or some questions from the copyright colleagues at where I work at ICID, which is Innovation Canada. And these are also overlapping. This is another thing to consider, that there is an overlap between functionality, the copyright, and the contracts. And this is now important to explain a bit, what do we mean by functionality? I believe that privacy, you can understand what privacy, it's almost self-explanatory. Security, kind of same thing. Functionality becomes a little bit tricky. What do we mean by it? There are few things here at play. You have the device. Does it function? If you want to make it in lame term, in a very simple way, does it function the way that it's supposed to function? So if we're talking about an IoT device, does it do what it's supposed to do? And who is liable for this device? If something goes wrong with this device, who do you go to for redress? And who is in charge of the contract terms? That's why it was important to add copyright as well as contracts under functionality, because here we are talking about who determines the digital rights to a device. So you have a device, and you need, for example, to operate it, to fix it, to twinkle with it. Who can do that? So that's one thing the consumer really needs to understand. And all of these things are kind of in the contract terms of the law. So that's why there is an interplay between the two. How is this idea that we go over one by one, or do we?
What is the full presentation that you want to give? And then
Okay, then I will do the full presentation, and then we can go back to it. So to move on, at least now you know the over thing, and then the gaps that we have identified so far. Because we still don't have narrowed key messages from, for example, on privacy, we looked at certain examples that can guide us through this process. So we have some really good material on the OPC Privacy Commission, the Office of the Privacy Commission, on tips how to protect the privacy. You can see that I also added sources here, but there are a lot. And what we need to do is to filter through it, to narrow it down, to see what are really the main thing and what is the overarching factors here. So we would need to consult more with our colleagues from OPC to come up with maybe new, more refined, and more specific to IoT devices. Similar thing with security. So we have also some general key messages, but I find the Get Cyber Safe to be a good starting point to start this discussion together, because they have certain messages and clear and concise. What we are finding from the gaps, though, is that we don't have those that are specific to IoT devices. So they seem to be more general. We also found, for example, there are great tips on the website for consumers who are using smartphones. One of the gaps that we have been identifying is, what about IoT? So I think this is one of the gaps that we are looking at, is what kind of messages that we can have for IoT devices. How many minutes do I still have? How many minutes do I still have?
Oh, well, just present what you want to present, and then we'll go in the discussion.
So, as I said, there are two considerations really to look at. The first one is that These issues are still ongoing. We are working together to also consolidate the messages with our partners on the functionality part, on the copyright and the contract law. We are looking for approvals from stakeholders and from the provinces in particular when it comes to contract law, because they are the one who still are in charge of the contract law. And there is also some overlap within issues, and from what I heard also there will be some overlap between what we are doing on messaging, on security issues, and the labeling counterparts today. So that will be really interesting to see how we would be working together and feeding into each other the information as well. One last thing I would like to kind of end with is something that I saw yesterday on my cell phone by coincidence. I was looking at a feed from friends on Facebook, and one of my friends is asking, so which smart lamp, I'm really into it because I just bought this new house and I would like to add some smart lamps to my house. So which one should I buy? This brand, or this brand? A stream of 40 people had responded to this question, mostly about pricing, okay, which one would be cheaper, mostly about looks or functionality, a bit, how does it function. Only one person mentioned the interoperability of the device. So does it work with your furnace, and would it cause problem if you didn't? No mention whatsoever about security or privacy. So I think there is a place here for consumer education if that's what's happening out there when people are purchasing these lamps, these thermometers, these devices for their homes. Thank you, and I hope to hear from you.
Please stay here. And because we're recording this for broader use of the people in our community, it is important that you use the microphones that are available for this. Purpose of this meeting is to say, so this is where you are. Do we agree? Is there anything you did miss? Or so we can build the next phase on what's been said here. So I suggest we go back to the first slide in a way. And
somebody has to turn it.
You can do on the back, on the red one, yeah, back.
Almost here.
Back.
Yeah.
Back.
Where is it? Here we go.
Okay. I would go back one more, then we can confirm the basis.
Yeah.
So first, it's said the aim is consumer education, right? It's for people that are using these devices that need to know about it. And we recognize three elements: the privacy, the security, and the functionality as key factors. That makes sense to you? So that seems to make sense globally. And then the next one is that we want to use those, in particular when buying the device, so people know beforehand. In the labeling discussion, we talked about this. That means that these information should be known at the same time that people know the price, you know? So it should be ideally presented at the same time, because that's the point that they're gonna buy it. And then the other factors that you mentioned is when using the device and when there's a problem. Does that make sense as such as well? So maybe one category to add, that's when you get rid of the device.
Okay.
So where do you do it? It's clear in case of a PC or a telephone, what do you do with the data on it? It's clear with also electronic devices, you can't just throw them away.
We kind of included it here, but if you find that it's better to be in some other place, but here, for example.
It's also after purchasing. Yeah, excellent. Please, Anne?
If I may, on this slide.
Yes.
Yes?
And
Did you-
it's great, everything you're doing is great, and don't misunderstand. I agree that the responsibility, that consumers have a responsibility to protect their data and do this and protect their privacy as well. But I think the only problem I have with this is it places all of the responsibility on the consumer as opposed to the proactive protection of privacy and security being embedded in the devices themselves, in the IoT, which should be the responsibility of the companies producing the IoT devices. So that's what I would like added to this, is especially before the purchasing, that the companies themselves should be ensuring that privacy and security are embedded into the devices and not leaving all of the responsibility for that data protection on the consumers, who are not particularly, they have no expertise in this field. They'll do something, and they should do something. But we can't place the burden of the responsibility on them. That should lie with the companies.
Thank you for that. I think if I can place it in the wider context, we not only talk about education, but also about labeling, which is based on certification. And in a way, what kind of labeling is needed in order to secure the networks, to the resilience of the networks. So the three streams do come together. But I think your point is well taken. Fout.
All right, thank you. So I think coming to your point, Anne, yeah, in labeling, we've actually had that discussion. And so in labeling, we're actually coming up with what are the marks that basically reflect the aspects of the vendor that include data, that include privacy, that include vendor SDLC. So when they're actually building a product, did they do a PIA, for example? Did they do penetration testing, all those kind of aspects? And so that's what we're trying to, and I'll have more of that when I do my presentation. But I think we're, and Rube, I apologize, but I mean, this is a good forum for this, but I think we have to do a better job as the work group, because I head up the labeling work group, is to cross-communicate. And so that'll have to be something that I think we need to figure out today, because I think your group needs to understand what we're looking at, because there's a lot of aspects that I think will provide the void here. So, for example, that pre-purchase. So if we're basically saying, here are the elements of a label, what does that label mean? So for example, we'll buy something today that's got like a CSA symbol on it. We buy it because it's got CSA. But do we buy it because it has CSA, or do we buy it because we know what that symbol means, right? But we have a certain amount of assurance that if we buy an electronic device and we see a symbol that we understand, we know there's a certain amount of assurance that it's safe. And so that's kind of almost that mindset that we have to do from an education perspective to equate a symbol and what exactly it means for that product from a security and privacy perspective.
Yes, so almost in a way it would be, we need to progress all these streams. So we need to be a little bit artificial in where we make the cuts. But I would think that the focus here is on what should consumers want to know and want to ask. And with that perspective, and knowing that the next stream of work we're going to talk about is the labeling and certification, the standards that will come with that, let's focus on, so what do consumers need to know, right?
And I'm really glad you brought it up, because this is a gap that we are trying now to bridge. Now I know that the labeling is also working where we can complement each other in different things. This is more for the consumer-focused education, and they are probably going to do some work.
Please. And
Yes. Hi.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
sorry?
How are
Thank you very much. Excellent work since we met last on August 15th, so lots of progress. Very good. I wanted to add to the privacy point. I agree certainly with what has been put here, but I think there is something we shouldn't rely on only at the time of purchasing that the user should look for privacy information. He should have a general awareness. What are the key types of data, types of information he should not be shared? Now it's general knowledge that SINs, social insurance numbers should not be shared. But what else? What kind of information should the consumer be aware that any device he uses does not have access to information or share it with the vendor or somebody else without his consent? Location information, what he's doing during the timeline information about his activities. Such information, many people are not aware that these are being recorded, and they have sensitivity to their way of life, what they're doing, their habits and their behavior. So I think we should identify what type of information is really affecting the privacy of the consumer. This develops with technology. It's not the same type of information that was shared 10 years ago. Now much more information is known and be tracked regularly. But consumers are not aware, for example, that if you have Google open on your phone, that the timeline of where you're going is completely saved from Google Maps.
Absolutely.
Nobody shares this kind of behavior.
That's
So-
definitely, that's what we're looking for. Other things that you think about privacy, key messages that should be included in there.
Yes.
Our privacy colleagues, perhaps also they can comment on that. Yes.
Conveniently next to you.
Hi. So I'm Jen Reese-Jones with the Ontario Information and Privacy Commissioner, and Vance is sitting right behind me, and he's with the Federal Privacy Commissioner. We've worked together in the past. So just looking at the list you have already there, so understand meaningful consent. I think that can be challenging even for regulators to decide what is properly established consent. So maybe if we break it down to, what of your personal information is being collected, and consider the level of sensitivity of that information to capture your point as well. So try to get more layman's terms there instead of maybe using terms like meaningful consent.
How would you paraphrase it? Because I would like to
So
write it
yeah,
down.
what personal information is being collected is, I guess, sort of at the very basic level. And do you have or do you understand how it may be used or disclosed? So collection, use, and disclosure is sort of the cycle that you would go through to consider.
Thank you.
On the privacy part, okay.
I don't.
Your colleague still, no? You were very happy with what you said.
That has a nice ring to it. Usage, disclosure, collection. 3 things.
Good. Any other points on the privacy line here? So thanks for that. Then on the security issues.
So for after purchase, do you have any also comments for the privacy? Are you okay with the? So we have here, learn about the privacy setting of your browser. Let the manufacturer know if you are not comfortable with your information being shared. And remove all your personal information before disposing of your connected device. Is there anything else that we should add? We have missed. Yes.
Thanks. I'm just wondering if the second point maybe doesn't fit in that column, because if you've bought the product, then all of a sudden you don't want to share your information. The product can't provide the service that it's intended to use. So I don't know if the consideration, there was discussion about having that in the other column. Does that make sense?
I see what you mean. The way we were looking at it, maybe it was, sometimes now every company is updating its privacy and you have to click yes, I consent or not. So already you have the device and there are
but if you don't
updates.
consent,
Yeah.
maybe the product can't do what it's intended to do, because it may need your personal information to be able to do whatever it needs to do.
So, yeah.
So we stay on this topic, and then Anne and your Brenda, you're on this topic too. Okay.
Thank you. To her point, the problem people have is not providing information to the manufacturer to make the device work. They understand there has to be some usually exchange of personal information. What they usually object to is that information being shared with third parties unknown to whom they haven't consented to the disclosure of that information externally. So it's one thing for the manufacturer if they are required to obtain certain information in order to make the device work, and the individual was informed of that at the time of purchase and consented to it in a positive way. This is different in terms of you're talking external third parties. The problem is not usually with the company that they're buying it from if they have an understanding of how it's going to be used, but they don't want their information shared with an array of unknown third parties, and that's what they object to. So I don't think the pressure should be on them to object to that. That should be a given, that we will not be sharing your information with third parties unless we have your express consent, something like that.
Okay, so since this is from the consumer part, and I hear both of you what you're saying, perhaps we just eliminate that message to eliminate the confusion, because as you're saying that it's not up to the consumers to tell the manufacturer, because it's not the manufacturers here, it's the third parties.
Right,
So-
but it's the manufacturers who will release the information to third parties. So somewhere we need to have something directed at the manufacturers and the companies, what they shouldn't be doing.
Okay,
Yep.
Brenda and then Stijn, just collect them.
I think to build on that, because I completely agree, and it's part of what I was twitching to say too, but from a consumer education perspective, the reality is right now the manufacturers are not doing the right things. They're not being transparent about when they're sharing or with whom they're sharing or how much money they make by doing so necessarily. So from a consumer education perspective, I think the concept of sharing is still an important one because we need to let people know, look, it's not an ideal world, and so at the moment, some of these devices may be sharing your information with third parties, and what you need to know is that it might happen and how to find out whether it's happening when you buy a device. So I would argue that we should keep it. We can be more explicit that it's about sharing with people, with third parties.
And the company should be pressured to release that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you
And
on
if
the
those
same
consumers
side?
know about it, there will be more of that pressure.
Okay, and Hussein, and then.
Thank you. Actually, I completely agree. I think the concept of sharing has to be stressed. And from our side, we need to make it a priority to consumer to understand how the information is collected and shared. And also we need to see if we can pressure the vendors or the community can pressure the vendor to release exactly what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So the response of the vendor is critical, and the understanding of the consumer and his expectation is also very, very critical.
Yep. Good. So we add that for sure on being clear on collection, disclosure of sharing and usage. And I think this is a point that will come back in the labeling as well. This is one of the elements you need to secure. I mean, the consumer will not know whether the data are, like your e-health case, the consumer doesn't know the data are we need to secure this. There was the other point that was made earlier. You cannot expect consumers to be responsible for knowing it all. We had you on the same topic, Knut?
Yep.
Okay. Please.
So I know when we started this, we committed to building off of existing mechanisms and processes. We have identified one in the before purchasing, which is the privacy information or the terms of service. So I think, as was discussed, having that information about what information is being shared as part of privacy information or terms of service. And this is something that was recently announced by Apple, actually, that they would require this in order to be compliant with GDPR, that app providers would provide additional information. So what we're saying is we're not pressuring. We are identifying what information we believe manufacturers need to include in terms of service that consumers want to know. That way they can make an informed decision in advance, and we've already identified it as something that they should make themselves aware of before purchasing. Now, building on that and leading into again, going back to the labeling and the labeling working group, so that would be information that would be known on a label. And I think we also spoke in that working group about a live element, so a link or some way of linking that label to more live or more recently updated information. So again, we need to think about not what we think necessarily needs to be done in the world, but if we have a live label, what information should be provided in that live label? Is there scope not just to have the terms of service consistently available through either going through a QR code to get to a more recently updated repository of information, but what additional privacy information or what additional information about the privacy or the sharing of that information of that device can be included, or can we try to figure out how it could be included as part of that live label? So this way we're not really identifying, I know there's a lot of things that we think are, need to be included and need to be understood. Well, I guess it's how to turn that into something concrete and actionable. That way we can get to the conversation about, okay, well, what are those things that need to be included in a privacy policy, in a live label, etc. Thanks.
Thanks so much. I'm sorry. You'll get your turn too.
Are you on the same topic as all these? Okay. So just one subtle amendment to some of the things I've heard that I think are really good about thinking about how data gets shared and how it interacts with third parties. I think it also matters how data gets used by the manufacturer itself, and thinking about how to communicate that. So the two largest standard consumer-facing IoT vendors in the world both have advertising divisions. Data collected to provide a service is very different than data being used by other departments within that same corporation. And thinking about the specific applications where data that's collected gets used is something that I would love to see more of in this. Actually, I'm going to pass it off to
Alyssa?
Okay.
Yeah, I think that goes back to consent use and disclosure,
Yeah.
disclosing the specific uses. But on security, I would add, and we haven't really talked about the at problem column, what is consumer recourse? Where do you go? What do you report if you encounter a security issue or you discover a security issue, whether it's the fault of the manufacturer or something that happens as a result of not securing your network, where you can
we
go
are
for
getting
kind
to
of
that.
information.
If we are finished with the privacy, we can start with the security. If anyone else would like to add anything else on the privacy, because then I will definitely address your question. It's a very good question.
Oh, okay.
It's in fact one of the gaps we identified.
The one thing I would like to see added to probably under the at problem column of privacy is how IoT devices affect users other than the purchaser. IoT devices fundamentally collect information about people around the devices, not necessarily the person who purchased a device, especially in public contexts. Thinking about consumer education from the perspective of people who are just in the proximity of IoT devices, I think is something I'd really love to see more of.
And why would you put it at problem? Why not something here or here? Like how is it going to be used before?
Honestly, because I'm not sure how I would fit a person who is not the primary user or the purchasing consumer into the model of those two columns.
Yeah, so the effect of
I know, it's
on the
very
privacy of other people than the user itself.
Very
basically.
interesting point. We haven't thought about it. We need to think about that one.
So it's basically don't peek into the bedroom window of your neighbor with your camera, things like that. It's also not by accident.
Yes, while I certainly agree with the point as being important, I sense we're kind of drifting away from the main purpose of what we're talking about here.
Consumer education, the consumer
Yeah, so
education.
this is not a broad discussion of privacy writ large in the world. This is discussion about privacy and security related to IoT devices. All right, so, and I think we'll have the most success if we can focus it on that, which is not to say there are not other problems related to privacy, such as the one that you mentioned. But I don't think we should drift. I think back to the original point, while maybe the practical solution is to repeat the point that says let the manufacturer know if you're comfortable with the information being shared, perhaps it should be repeated in before purchasing and after. I think that's the kind of simple solution to the original question. So
I hear you almost saying what the lady next to you had said before, and I was thinking that would be satisfactory message before the purchase of the device. But if you have different wording or different aspect that you like to add to it, or is this satisfactory?
well, I really don't want us to start wordsmithing all of the words here. I know that they're done, with a view to being very succinct. Personally, I was comfortable with the words that were there. I thought they captured most of the discussion that we were having. And other than the point that was originally made that indeed the issue of transparency on security policy should be messaged before your purchase as well as after,
Yes.
because sometimes there are changes in policies.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, we have about
Can
10
we-
minutes left.
We should go to the security part.
Yes, so One point I took away, but and I hear you, Alan, on not wordsmithing and things and not going all over the way. But I think consumers should be also informed about how they use their devices in a way not to break privacy of others purposely. So how do you use it responsibly? So, and?
Placing the burden on the consumer again. There was, that example with Alexa recently where this couple were having an intimate conversation in the vicinity of the Alexa, and they got a call from a contact of theirs saying, we just heard this strange conversation that you guys were having. I don't know why it was transmitted to us, but it was. The reason I'm saying that is people have to know that the Alexa or Echo or other connected devices may capture information that was never intended for them, but you're in the vicinity of the device and it can pick it up. I don't know how prevalent that is, but the point is people must be made aware of that so that all your, intimate sweet nothings with your spouse or private conversations with your children don't get picked up by these devices where you had no intention of it being picked up. That kind of knowledge and awareness, first of all, it shouldn't do it, but it does do it. There was just another story about that again today in the clips. So I think that is really critical. What kind of information is actually picked up by these devices and transmitted without your knowledge or consent or instruction, but happens?
Okay, we captured that. We're going to work on it and share it with the group again to get, but we have captured all these. Thank you very much for your input on that. Perhaps we can move to the security part?
I think so, and on the security, we do take the first point that Lisa gave,
Yes.
which is consumer recourse when there are problems, right?
Yeah. So if I just could go first before the purchase, because your question is really at problem. And as you can see, there is a gap there. At problem, you have a problem with security, what happens? We are still not sure because it seems to be depending on the impact of the security measure being hacked. For example, if you have a device, an IoT device that's being hacked, or any other device for knowledge, just to be general, if there is a device that's being hacked, what impact does it have? What negative impact or harm does it have on the consumer? If it's financial, then you're going to be contacting the financial authorities. If it is privacy, you're contacting the OPC, our colleagues here, to tell them about it, to report it, to see what they can do for redress. If it is so financial, if it is privacy, we know where to go. If it is linked to contracts, you're looking at your contracts and contacting the provinces and their consumer protection offices. But what about the security itself? And that's where I agree here with Dr. Ann when she said security does not equal privacy, because that was really an issue. The first thing that I was pondering upon when we started this IoT multi-stakeholder process is what is the link between the two and how different they are. But yet we don't really have a body where a consumer can go to say there was a security issue, not the impact of the security issue. So I kind of agree with you. We have identified a gap here.
I think the right person may have the microphone in his hand right now.
Yes.
Actually, I can talk to that all day, but
You have
really,
2 minutes.
I'm looking at your first point on the before purchase, okay?
Yes.
And so you're making the statement, are the security measures in place by the company? But you follow it up by something interesting because it's an actual feature of the product. So one of the things that we've discovered is you have to, from an IoT vendor perspective, you can't just focus on the product, because you have to focus on how the company got to the product. And so what are the controls? And when I say control, that's a person, process, or technology that they put in place to actually get there. So, for example, do they have an SDLC? If they actually don't have a process to create a secure product, you can't assume that they have that second piece in there. Because if they didn't do, for example, a privacy impact assessment, if they didn't do a threat risk assessment, and if they didn't do something that's called threat profiling, they'll never get to a secure product. So you have to look at the overall vendor company from the beginning and say, what are those aspects that you've put in place to actually create that product at the end? And that's the only way you're going to get a secure product.
What would be the question if a consumer who is not very aware about the technicalities of security measures and processes of security? What would be the key message to a consumer that they understand whether this product is secure, encrypted?
And it comes back to my point about the labeling, right? So if we, at the labeling group, and create the reference standards that derive that, then when the consumer buys it and it has that emblem on their packaging or on as a sticker on the product, then they then have that assurance that it has gone through that formal process of formal certification and testing, not just from a product perspective, but also from that corporate entity perspective. And I'll talk about that a bit more when I'm doing my presentation.
So the messages could be different. The message could be, does it have that assurance,
Exactly.
a labeling
So,
that assures the security process has been implemented?
That's right. Or here's 3 different symbols that would indicate different kind of levels of assurance. So if it has this one, this is what it means. If it has this one, this is what it means. And that's part of why we need to expand that a bit to that pre-purchase decision. Yeah. Thank you.
So once you have that, we need to add it, embed it into this before they purchase. Okay.
I note that consumers need to know about the processes used by vendors, assurances.
You are in agreement with the other points, which is pretty straightforward. Ask about the availability and duration of the security upgrade and patches. And this seems to be a straightforward thing to do. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
You had a question
I'm sorry.
regarding where to go if the IoT device is hacked. The vendor should have some sort of service, customer service line for these questions. But I would always think that law enforcement has a role to play, because hacking a device and getting access to the home or to business infrastructure is a very serious issue. I don't think should be only left to the vendor. I think law enforcement with its own different categories have a significant role to play. And raising customer awareness about the significance of such an event if it happens is, I think, one of the part of the education that we should raise.
Okay, we
So
should
law
do
enforcement
that.
has a role to play. Thank you.
Something that hasn't been touched on in the before category, advise consumers to figure out what the device does that they don't need or want.
Can you elaborate on that one?
It's basically the concept of hardening a device. If you don't need it or want it, turn it off. You can't necessarily do that with a device, but you can figure out when you're buying it, does this do what I want, or does it do other things that I want and or don't want, and make that part of your purchasing decision. During the operation, patch isn't up there. The single biggest thing that's missing from that list is patch, and it should be patch automatically. The user shouldn't have to do it. It should just happen, because if it can't, you have a device that you can't fix if you have a problem. Something we've touched on, where to place the device after purchasing, both physically, the Alexa example was mentioned already, and logically, where you put it in your network. Those are both things that you've touched on slightly there that we really need to highlight. And afterwards, we need to follow guidance from the vendor, pursue with law enforcement as necessary. And I also think we need to be talking about resetting and or re-imaging, because those are the standard incident response techniques that are done with other IT equipment. And there's nothing special about IoT devices in that context. You should be able to mitigate them somehow. If you can't, you've got a big problem with that device.
As a consumer?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left.
Okay. So quickly, because I would like to know about the. Are we okay with some of the messages that are existing here? Basically, these messages, anyway, we were using messages that were provided by the Get Cyber Safe. The only thing that I said, and I want to reiterate, is we need almost identical messages, but just for IoT, specific messages for IoT devices that were, this is another gap. So we were set up to find the gaps, and that's what we found. This is the second gap. Any comments on that?
I think it's an okay starting point, right? Thank you.
Anything about copyright? So copyright deals with the digital rights management.
I think we don't have the time to go into the copyrights and the contracts
So I'm just
anymore.
going to talk about the gap. Well, it's not really a gap. What we have identified when it comes to contracts and when it comes to copyright is that it's too late. Once the consumer has the device, it is in the contract. The only thing they can do when they have a problem with it is to go back to the contract, the term of the contract. Can they return the device? Can they exchange the device? What can they do with the device? And this is more of provincial consumer protection mechanism that exists at the province level, and that's why we have to agree with our provincial counterparts on the key messages. But because it is really before they buy it, you have to ask the questions. Who can repair it? Is it interoperable? This is very important. Does it work with the other devices that you have in your home? And if there is a repair to be done, who is responsible for repairing it? Yeah, I would leave it at this. If you have any other comments that you like to add for the subject on functionality or security, please go ahead before we finish this session.
So a comment on functionality that I'm not sure if it fits under copyright or contract, but a good question to ask is, what do you want the device to do? What can it do? How does it function? And what should it never do?
Don't dry your cat in the microwave. Thank you for this last remark from Alan, and we'll have more opportunity to ask input for a Slack as well.
Excellent.
So at the risk of repeating myself, I thought our process was focusing on IoT security, all right? And what I'm seeing is consumer protection for IoT devices. And those are, I see the IoT security as a subset of the broader. And so I just want to make the point that particularly if we start going down too much into the copyright and contract issues, like my interest is more on the security side. And I take the point, the relationship between security and privacy. I take that, but as the point I made before, this is not about privacy in general. It's about privacy related to security, all right? In other words, where a breach of security can compromise privacy, right? So I see this as a much more focused exercise than perhaps I'm seeing there. Thank you.
Is that true? No, because when we set up this this whole process from the beginning, there were two meetings in person. And I believe the stakeholder group had agreed on 3 main categories that we were going to look at, which is the privacy, the security, and the functionality of the product.
Let's take this point back to when we end up talking about where are we, what do we need to adapt in our course, etc., which is after we discuss the 3 tracks. I noted your point, so it will be up and we won't forget it. So thank you very much, Ruba, for this. Just also the invitation is more comments, more thoughts that are now here and there's no time to express it, or that come up later for you. Please do use the Slack system. It's really useful way of capturing your remarks and will be very helpful to also content-wise move forward in also this area.
Yeah, especially there is one for just the working group on education that I'm responsible for kind of coordinating these messages. Please don't be shy to contact me and let me know what you think. Thank you very much.
Just so everyone is aware too, if you want an invite to our Slack group, you can email me at stark@isoc.org and I'll make sure you're included.
Thank you very much. Fout, can you do your presentation about the labeling progress where we are?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm just going to give you the Coles Notes version of what we've been doing. I'm going to try to skip through this real fast because really want to get into the discussions on really where we want to take this, what we've been looking at, some of the open kind of considerations, those things, because we've been really a smaller group involved, so it'd be good to kind of have that bigger voice. Just as an update, talk about just kind of where we kicked off, how we established ourselves on June 21st, some of the input, some of the discussions that have been going on the Slack discussions, the webinar that we did August 1st, and then some of our next steps. So we did the formal establishment of our group along with the other groups June 21st. Basically, we created a tour. Sorry, I use a lot of ISO references just because I've been involved in ISO for way too long. So TOR is terms of reference. So what you typically do is when you start a project, you will create a reference, or what are you working towards? In this case, our scope is labeling regimes. How could they be applied and how can they be enhanced in the Canadian landscape? That's kind of the goal of our group. So in relation to that work group, we also kind of came up with these questions. So here's what we're working towards to make sure we stayed on track through the course of that, because I think coming back to Alan's point, it's easy to get into discussions in a closed group and you kind of get misguided. So I'm not going to go through these in a lot of detail because a lot of this stuff has kind of been around in our group. So, but I think the key things for us as an objective is there current standards or certifications that could be applied to the landscape right now? If so, what are they, and what are those labels a result of that we could bring awareness to? Really, in a nutshell, that's what we're working towards, okay? So we also had a lot of inputs, primarily from the privacy side, that came from other documents that were being created. These were sent in as consideration for a label. Now keep in mind, there's no actual label right now specifically for privacy, okay? You can say the same thing for security as well. Now, there are nuances of that. I'm not gonna have that discussion right at this point, but we can have that after, okay? And then finally, we had a webinar. So this webinar was to look at basically what is the landscape of labeling right now and what are the implications for labeling in the landscape. And so there was 3 presenters that gave different views, and I thought this was really educational for me because there's lots of stuff going on, and while I do a lot of stuff both from a testing assessment and also an ISO IEC perspective, there's still lots of other stuff going on that you just can't keep aware of. Some of these I kind of knew at a top level, but actually hearing from different experts in the region was eye-opening, and it was a really good discussion that we had. And so Jonathan basically walked through some of the EU labeling initiatives that are going on, what they're looking at, what are the criteria, both from a corporate perspective and a testing perspective that need to be considered. By the way, all the, if I'm not mistaken, the video is online for this, right? So if you have the opportunity, it's an hour long, so it's not too bad. Download it to your iPad in your next flight. And take a look at that because all of this stuff is detailed in that discussion. Jacques gave a really good in-depth presentation, and the big thing that he talked about was the EU Cybersecurity Act. So this is really interesting because they're really putting a bigger mandate on vendors. And that is, I think, a result of weaponizing. So if you've never heard the term weaponizing, it's basically where you take something that is an object, potentially this object, and you basically turn it into a weapon. And what does that mean is, potentially if I had a pacemaker, can I turn this into a device that basically attacks my pacemaker because I'm a target of interest? That's what weaponizing is, okay? Lots of fun. Happens all the time. So coming back to some of our devices that are being in our homes, they're weaponizing it. I think coming back to Hassan's kind of point, law enforcement is not even close to being ready to take this on. And unfortunately, who are you going to call? Typically, if you go anywhere, you have to call your local police if you get compromised. Most local police are not well prepared to deal with the onslaught of what's going on. They just don't have the technical expertise. And then on top of that, if, for example, you're getting attacked from the United States is attacking your devices, the amount of loopholes legally that they have to go to do the tracebacks to be able to do things without an IP and other information is long and drawn out. So that whole process is another issue that needs to be fixed. It's not something you or I or anyone in this room I think is going to be able to address, but it's a bigger kind of problem of the attack surface. And finally, I gave a presentation of what is going on for current labeling and products out there from a label perspective. I talked at a high level because it's not so much the consumer side, but I'll just make you aware of it. There is a standard called IEC 62443, and it can be used for industrial components, okay? So you can get a certification. There's really 3 levels of it. You can certify the actual product, you can certify the development process, or you can certify the actual deployment of that product within a certain configuration. Now that, yep, 62443. And if you do a search for that, there's 14 parts to the standard. Now, not all parts can be certified to. A lot of it is just input both to the organization and to the evaluator who's conducting the actual assessment work. But there's 3 parts that you can. So there's 3-1, 4-1, and 4-2. And so those ones, so for example, if you had an oil refinery, you would use one of these. There's product, I'm not going to get into the technicalities, but there's what are called PLCs, RTUs, all different kind of components like that that are very industrial based, stuff that we would never put in our homes. If you have them in your home, I'd love to talk to you because I'd like to see what your home looks like. But it's stuff that's very, very technical. It's very, very time sensitive on a network, and the skill set in order to do ladder logic is very specialized. You don't want to debug ladder logic. It's just not fun. But we did talk about, sorry, I'm supposed to do full disclosure. So full disclosure, I have 3 things I think I need to disclose. So one is I'm the Canadian chair of what's called ISO-IEC. So we are the standards group that create all the cybersecurity standards. You might have heard of 27000 series. Anne has actually put in stuff. She's a member of Work Group 5 and has basically provided lots of comments for things like de-identification more recently. So I head up that committee in Canada. So that's full disclosure 1. Full disclosure 2, because of that relationship, I work really close with the folks at CSA Canada who do a lot of product testing and certification. And so we do have representatives from CSA. So I want to disclose that I do have a relationship with them. I also want to disclose that I have a relationship with CIRA, the Canadian Internet Registry Authority, because they're working on an IoT project of which I'm involved in. So full disclosure, okay? So I just wanted to preview that because I want to talk about some of the stuff that CSA is doing, which I think is really important to this whole discussion, because CSA has actually come up with a process to help, I think, alleviate some of the discussion that we've had here. And it's a formal process of going through a testing end to end where it does consider both the organization, the product, and the product that they deliver. It's 3 stages. We can allow them the freedom to actually have that, tell us more about that if they so choose. But I think it is an interesting model for the future because it gets us to the point where we need to be. So when someone purchases that product, they know it's the product and the organization has gone through a formal assessment process. And I think that's what we're all looking for. I keep hitting this, and I apologize for that. My hands are just way too busy. So I'll leave that where it is. Our next steps is really, we started to create an outline. So we threw something together based on some of the discussions, and we basically want to start socializing this. I did not attach that to this presentation, unfortunately. I thought about that after. But it's something we might be able to try to pull up. I don't know if we can, to actually show you the outline that we've kind of come up with. Very high level. It's really just meant to be a discussion point. And from there, hopefully, we will get more members involved. We can have that discussion and then start to build the content as necessary. So we started to build it. I started to pull something together. It was kind of all over the place. And when I sent it to Martin, he was like, hey, this is good, but he's being very polite to just say, hey, this is not good. And said, we need to restructure this a bit. I said, yes, I 100% agree with you. Let's just step back a little bit. And so that's what we'd like to do as an output to this discussion today. And then the other thing too is over the next couple of months, flesh out that document. And then I think we're meeting again in November sometime. And then at that point, be able to give you a good sense to what we're working towards from this. So at that point, you know, also hopefully working closer with the awareness group as well. You know, what are those things that the consumer and the business need to be aware of? From a purchase, pre-purchase, from a purchase, from an operation, and from an awareness and destruction or, removal of the product. That whole life cycle needs to be, I think, addressed from a consumer and business perspective. So I think that's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe good to go into some of the outline software report.
So sorry, I don't know if there's a way you can you project it, because there's a connector here. Is that easy enough to do?
I don't have Wi-Fi access here.
Oh yeah, because you have to everyone online.
Do you have a sticky? Well,
your physical copy.
Oh, maybe.
Okay, yeah, if you maybe, and I'll just read the outline.
So what we're going to do is take you through the outline of the report and per chapter, in a way, ask you for your thoughts and input, and we'll take that in consideration.
So there's a scope section I won't necessarily read in any depth. Then we started talking about concepts. So in concepts, we are basically outlining some of the standards. So in this, what I started to do, because there's so many, you have to separate, there's almost two kinds of standards. And when I say that, it's not that I mean disrespect to any group, okay? There is international standards that are recognized, and the only two groups that create those standards are either ISO or the ITU, okay? They're recognized as international. If you create a standard, for example, NIST, that's an American standard, okay? So you need to keep that in perspective. So when you're looking to do product certification, if, for example, you do a NIST certification, it really is for the US marketplace. If you take a NIST standard and try to use that as your benchmark in, say, Asia or Africa or the Middle East, it will not typically get accepted because it doesn't meet the needs potentially of the market. Doesn't mean that they're invalid, okay? Please do not interpret that, because that is not what I'm telling you. In a lot of cases, organizations like ISO work with these other groups to basically create equivalencies across the board. If you look at a lot of the 27,000 series standards, they're fully mapped to the NIST standards for cybersecurity. So if you meet one, you meet the other, okay? So we talked about some of the stuff that's going on in SC27. And we also, another group or two groups of interest are SC41. So SC41 has got the title of IoT and related products and services. So within that whole umbrella, what we're doing is, and I'm, full disclosure again, I've been the national chair for that committee as well, the last better part of 6 years. Up until recently, I've stepped down to vice chair of that committee. And so what we've done is we're just getting ready to release 30141, and that's a reference architecture for Internet of Things. As a follow-up to that, we're also creating standards for interoperability and multiple different sectors. Canada's been quite active in this area recently, and some of the stuff that I found out is underwater aquatics, for example. The acoustic part of that, Canada's been a leader. Never knew about this. And because of that, we've been using a lot of the standards that have been created in Canada for the international market, and we're resubmitting those under that new committee. So it's kind of cool, some of the stuff that's going on. And the other big thing that I'm working on that I'll make you aware of is also SE27 has been studying IoT better part of 3 years now. We have finally started our work in that, and I'm the international editor for something called 27030, which is guidelines for security and privacy for Internet of Things. And for that, what we're trying to do is we're working with SC41 to create the framework for security and privacy, or what we call trustworthiness, because there's more parts of it in the whole framework. So SC41 is going to create the framework. SC27 is going to create the requirements. And so when you're looking at the requirements for a product, including the security piece, because Workgroup 5 deals with privacy in that context, is going to create that whole framework to say, here's all the things you need to look at. And it also gives us the potential to create a certification scheme from that. Okay? And?
Thank you. The security and privacy framework, I'm just hoping that they will be focusing on embedding it in design.
Yes.
The proactive aspects of it.
Yeah, and that's a key part.
That would be great. If you could kindly convey that, whatever you can share with me.
Yeah.
And then I'll make it
Yep.
whatever I permit it to, publicize it.
Yeah.
Because right now, people think there's a real paucity of information and activity in that area. So I'd love to point them to you and say, no, it's being addressed, proactively embedded in design.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a key element. I mean, two things. I mean, one, I'm a cybersecurity practitioner. Two, my organization is brought in to help engineer and test a lot of solutions. A big part of that is instilling that mindset for how you actually create a secure product and dispelling the myth that adding security to a product increases costs. It's BS, okay? We've been able to show this time and time again. We've helped lots of companies. If they include security and privacy at the front end, it is no more expensive. Actually, it's a lot cheaper. And I'll tell you why, is the lawyers aren't involved at the end. Right? And sorry for the lawyers in the room and on the phone and online, but yeah. And are you ready to present?
I'm sorry?
Or you
No, I'm
okay,
just
sorry.
Having the data here as well.
Oh, okay. Okay. Let me do that. So I'll go through these bullets real quickly. So labeling was, what information do consumers need to have, when and where to be provided, either online and offline, how to be provided that information. And I think Jordan's going to touch on some of this in his presentation, so I'm not going to steal his thunder. Specifically, the standards are designed with regards to privacy and security, display of that information, updates and support for devices. Certification was what standards, who provides the standard, what about the products in other jurisdictions. Then there was another section on enforcement. What if certificates are not reflecting the right information on specific devices? And what if consumers use device and services in harmful or illegal ways? And then finally was empowering consumers through education, provide source of trusted information, awareness, raising on the risk and availability of trusted information, and education in approaches towards making smart choices, which comes back to our linkage with the other work group. So those were kind of some of the big discussion points that we had, and I think that's it. We gave a sample of what a potential logo would look like, because the CSA folks basically allowed me to create one. So I had to get the approval from them to basically, and I can't really show it to you from just paper, but it's online from our presentation. So I think that was the key elements that I wanted to just share today, and looking forward to good discussion.
So, Taylor?
So thank you very much, and I do really appreciate that you guys had actually drafted a paper or something to elaborate on both the process and kind of the broader context. So yeah, there definitely seems to be that in the process of thinking through what needs to be put in a label ultimately what are the requirements of the label. And I would draw folks' attention to that when they read the paper, because the requirements are almost, they include what we've thought of as what are the key messages that consumers need to know when buying an operating device. So it not only includes everything that we've tried to identify and are working towards in the consumer working group, but almost goes beyond in ways that I think are very positive. An actual section on data, which I think has very strong overlaps with the functionality piece. So how would you see, or how would you recommend bringing that work together going forward?
So I think that probably the easiest way, and obviously we have to agree this as a group, but I think I think maybe the next step as myself as a lead and Jordan and Jacques, as we start to get this framework, I think we need to just have a joint meeting, probably a joint editing meeting, and say, here's what we're talking about, here's the inputs that I think are important to, the awareness group, to the resilience group, and have that maybe at a 2-week interval to just make sure that information is being cross-populated. I think that's key. I mean, a lot of us got full-time jobs, so it's hard to just maintain writing all the documents. So it's, I think from that perspective, it's just setting up the process to do that, and we have to basically get the group's approval that that's accepting, and then we basically are allowed the latitude to basically create that schedule amongst ourselves to be able to do that information sharing. And then once we do that, we can probably just in our documents create the bullet points or whatever to just say, hey, this is what we got from this group. Any comments or suggestions on either this, the content, or anything else that's being provided.
Yes, I think it was already clear when you talked about the education part. So what do consumers need to know? From an education perspective, you need to know what you want to put on the label. You can't put anything on there that they don't need to know. That doesn't help. So that's a key element. Please, Laura.
Hi, Foud. This might be a longer question, but are there any thoughts about piloting a label, almost from putting it into a consumer's hands and being able to perhaps run some focus groups on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, that would be a decision that we make within the group, but that would be very interesting to maybe, I don't know how we'd facilitate that, but creating different groups of symbols to say, what does this mean to you kind of thing. And maybe we just use ourselves as the guinea pigs to begin with, right? We just send it around the group and we create different symbols and say, what does this mean to you, good, bad, or indifferent? Because, I mean, there's different cultural contexts. So I think if you look at, just the number of people across the country who were involved, in different regions, different backgrounds, both from tech, policy, just all over different sectors, they will basically be able to provide necessarily that initial kind of feedback to what we're looking for in a label. I mean, that might be something we consider.
Okay.
Hi there. So I was just wondering whether there has been any discussion so far about the possibility of creating sort of standards or requirements for terms of services themselves and what that might look like in terms of an accreditation regime. Just because, and I think this is one piece that might have been missing earlier in the discussion too, is thinking about accessibility in terms of services, just in the sense that we know that there's a massive diversity of users of IoT, and a lot of these are young people as well. And so not only ensuring kind of the language and the design of the terms of services are maybe compliant with some sort of standards, that also may be a good point to kind of bridge the work of these two groups together. So I was just wondering whether that's something that's come up in discussion so far and any ideas you have on what that could look like.
So there's been no real discussions about terms of use so far. Just accessibility from an ISO perspective, there is an ISO group that deals with accessibility requirements, and they are not to get into the whole ISO thing, basically groups that are interested in developing a standard can create what's called a liaison relationship with the actual committee. So we have SC41, which is our main committee for IoT, and there are liaisons who represent the accessibility standards, and they attend the meetings. The lady who attends, her name is Dr. Kate Grant. She's based out of Cambridge in the UK. Really smart woman. I've known her for years. And what's interesting about Kate is she actually is also got quite advanced arthritis. So I don't know how she types, but it's amazing to just see her type, because she doesn't really have the use of her fingers per se, but she's actually able to type, and she brings that because she lives it every day, but then she represents that whole sector to say, okay, not only that, accessibility, right? So the point was brought up about as we get older, we want to stay in our home longer. So how do we facilitate that? I think IoT is a huge opportunity to allow us all to do that. And so it gives us a certain amount of freedom. How do we do that? By protecting the citizen in their home while they do those kind of things. So I think there's those aspects. But terms of use has not come up in the actual conversation and wasn't necessarily part of our scope per se. Doesn't mean it can't be added, but it just from the time we started in June to now, it just hasn't been part of the discussion.
Dus if I may speak for Alan a little bit, how does it move back to secure IoT? It's very much, of course, that those devices need to be used well. So two elements. One thing we discussed before here, but also came up in the webinar, is we can't expect consumers to do things or to know things you shouldn't expect them to do or know. So that should be, in a way, already at the producer side, the vendor side, be taken care of. And the other side is that consumers should be able to handle those devices in ways that can be expected from them. I'm not sure we would go as far as to say, so how do, what is the proper term, disabled or handicapped? I'm always confused with it. But how people who are less able to use those devices, how they can use them. I think that's beyond the scope of the project itself. But for sure, the ability to use it in safe ways, I think that could well be within the scope of the standard, right?
Yeah. So I mean, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. Just if I may, I also meant accessibility in a bit of a broader sense.
Okay.
I also meant in terms of language that's used, and so to the meaningful consent piece, you can't have meaningful consumer consent without language that's a little bit less technical than what we all might be used to. But also, further to that, I think what has really come forward so far is like the need for that multi-directional effort, obviously, right? You need to have the producers of IoT obviously embedding security and privacy in their design, but equally, as one of the comments earlier acknowledged, we don't live in a perfect world currently. So I guess what I was trying to say is that we do really need to be conscientious, I think, from a security perspective, about how different people experience security. And so while that does risk, I think, obviously we want to keep things within a reasonable scope, I do think it's a very important conversation to be had and to reconsider maybe what we mean by security in that sense sometimes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, that's fair. And I think it also speaks to the point of what are the elements from the security perspective that need to go into the awareness piece, because, and I agree with you, if you read like a EULA on any site, I don't read them. I mean, I'm not a lawyer. I don't think most lawyers understand what the heck a EULA says. But I think to speak to that is what are the elements that you need to look for. And I don't think if you look at the way a security operates, you can tell a lot about their security and privacy posture, not necessarily by reading their EULA, but the way they operate. If you go and start poking around elements of their website and their products, you can pull back the covers and go, I can tell that they're not secure. Like that, you can, because there's those warning signs. So if we can create that list of warning signs, so when you're doing your pre-purchase, you go in and say, hey, these guys don't have the elements that make me feel secure, whether take the whole certification piece right out of the picture. And then all of a sudden you can then say, okay, what else do I need to look at? So there's like level 1 and then there's level 2. And so even if companies, for example, a lot of them have like security at 12 dot, right, my company. if they don't even have that, or if you send them an email for correspondence and they don't respond back in, say, 24 hours, or even give you the courtesy of an autoresponder that says, hey, we're still looking at this, whether they do or not is irrelevant. But those kind of things, so you know that they're paying attention. When you don't see that kind of response, then you quickly know they don't have the process and procedure in place to actually do those kind of things. So those are the things that you need to look for. Those are the things we need to educate the consumer on. And I think that's where you get the accessibility, right? Because if we teach you the basics to understand, you can quickly make the determination if you want to use a service or not.
And if I may say, that's just one of the elements, because the other element we discussed on labeling is, so labeling first should be depicting something that people can get, right?
Yeah.
But behind that, there's information on the certificate, on what process it went through, on special characteristics like functionality, data sharing, etc. And one of the things we did discuss is this should be readable. So basically, it should be online, which means you can facilitate different languages, but which means you can also facilitate particularly machine readability. And that's important for connecting things, but it's also important for search engines if you want to purchase a device, that this information can be read and is accessible in that way as well.
Yeah, and it's something that Jordan's going to be covering in his presentation, but just at a high level, what we're looking at is creating a specification that basically has a QR code right now. So you as the consumer, you can do one of two things. One, you can go into the store, take your device and go click, and technically if we've done the specification correctly and companies are going to buy into it, it's going to take you to a website. It's going to tell you what that product is, all the details of it, to security, privacy, testing, latest firmware, et cetera, security vulnerabilities, even something called MUD. I'm not going to get into MUD. I'll let Jordan kind of try to explain that one to you. And then so from that, you'll understand that there's spin-off projects that are happening right now in the industry where with things or concepts like MUD, we can create an IoT router that basically says, here's this device, here's what it should be doing on my network. It's not allowed to do anything else. I put that device on my network. Here's a policy that basically controls that device to only allow it to go to google.data.net or something like that. It can only ever talk to that server. If it attempts to talk to my fridge or my stove or whatever it might be, it's shut down and it's put into a quarantine. That's where the technology is going to. That's where the specifications are going to. And so we're trying to work part and parcel to what is happening with the industry, also trying to influence the industry to say, here's what we need to do in IETF. Because they basically write the standards for the internet. So we're working with them to kind of, make sure that those kind of requirements are being built into the routers. So the home router then provides the level of safety net for the product within the home, and it basically isn't leading to the weaponizing that we're seeing today.
So, but this links also into the third work stream of network resilience, and Jordan will talk more about it. But you see how this relates to labeling as well, because that same information can be used for informing people as well.
Yeah. So thank you very much. I'm around, so give me a ping if you want to talk.
10 minutes.
Oh, I do have 10 minutes? Oh, okay, sorry. I thought I was getting the chokehold. Anything else?
So one of the discussions we had on the webinar, that maybe Fout, you're thinking on that, is what do you certify? Because the labels need to stand for information that is certified. We already talked about that you can certify processes and you can certify functionalities in a way of tools.
So maybe, and I don't mean to pass the buck and I don't mean to put CSA on the hang, but CSA is working on a process to do that, right? And so we kind of talked about their cyber verification process. I presented that at a previous meeting, kind of touched on it just at the beginning of my presentation. I mean, the outline I can give you and allow CSA to have a discussion on that is, they looked at a three-part process. I'll maybe just open it up and then I'll give it to you, maybe Laura, to provide some more information, or Stephen. And so it's basically a three-part process, okay? So first there's a self-assessment for the organization. There's 198 questions. They're basically binary. So true or false, do you do it or do you not? Okay? that goes for a grading process. Depending on that grading, it then goes to an on-site audit. That audit then results into another grading. And what you're looking for basically is a maturity model. Where are they from a maturity, from a security perspective, including privacy, because there's privacy questions in there for we looked at how do they collect the data, how do they process the data, both on system, off system, and then how do they destroy the data when it's no longer useful. Those are all considered. Did they do a PIA? Right, all of those things. Do they have a process to alert users of their system that they've been compromised? So we look at all of kinds of things like that with the CSA process. And then from that, if there's a high enough maturity level, the determination is met that then a testing phase is conducted. And that's a full-on end-to-end product. And when I say product, I mean the device in field, which may or may not include a mobile application, a web application, a middleware, and a back end, which could be any kind of data storage. And then that basically results in the actual attestation. Okay? And I don't know, Laura, if there's anything else, or Stephen, if there's anything else that you'd like to add to that.
Thanks, Val. There's some very interesting concepts that you're bringing up. So just to be clear, there's a difference between attestation and certification. And we tend to use them interchangeably, and that's erroneous. Certification would presume, or the consumer would presume, that certification means this product is absolutely certified to be secure. Let me dispel that. There's no such thing. It will not exist. Right? No product will be absolutely secure. You can attest to the standards that Val spoke to, plus the process that we're talking about, to give you a very good indication that the product is secure when it comes out of the box. What may happen, however, and this is reality, is that there's constantly, though bad guys, to put it in those terms, that could potentially get at that product one way or another. And so all the items that you had up on the consumer is very, very important. Continually update, continually change, continually add to your product and so forth. Do not expect, and this is kind of something that the consumer has to realize, CSA or any other certification organization can protect you forever from that product being misused, mishandled, or not updated, or whatever the case might be. So what you'll see from the process is that we will obviously do a lot of attestation. There'll be a label that essentially says that. It'll talk to 62443 or something like that. All right, it'll have something in back of it that would say here's all the documentation related to that and how it actually worked and what we did to bring the product to that level. It will be obviously signed off by the manufacturer, and that it in fact is their responsibility, all right, to keep their products up to date and so forth. But I think what also is important, it didn't come up here yet, so I think it should at some point. When we talk about security in terms of the product, what about security in terms of the label? And I spend half of my life on counterfeit labels. All right, so it says that everything is good because it's got a CSA label on it or a UL label or whatever, and it's actually a counterfeit label. Right? So how do we protect the label against not being protected the way it should be? So that's some of the irony that needs to go into, I think, some of your discussion. And this got to do with things like QR codes, obviously, but also holographic images, those kinds of things. And if someone does try to provide a counterfeit version of that, there is a way by which we'd be able to check that. And that becomes very secure in terms of how we would actually do that. And those products would actually come back to CSA. They wouldn't go back to the manufacturer at the start point, because that's a legal issue at that point. And so then the lawyers would get in touch with the lawyers of the manufacturer and say, we've got an issue they may not even know about. And some of those labels actually are so well done, incredibly well done. Right? Only the engineers would know that in fact it's been counterfeited. Right? So just something to keep in mind. In any case, that's pretty much all I want to say. But what I really want to get at, though, is with respect to a lot of this, it's really, really good steps forward. There's no getting around it. And this really needs to be done in this respect. Something else to keep in mind, though, do not, if you can, keep it only within the Canadian context. And my logic behind that is because 95% of all manufacturers of IoT products do not originate in Canada. They're coming from somewhere else. And coming from somewhere else means you need to be involved with their particular, whatever legal aspects they may be involved with, or whatever processes they may be using to recognize that. Okay, and so that's what we're currently working on with a number of manufacturers. They're not Canadian-only manufacturers. And recognizing the Canadian input is absolutely vital, but doing it at the IEC level or the ISO level, which how it operates, is essential.
Thank you very much.
Add to that?
Sure. I was going to give a 2-minute overview, which isn't going to touch enough on it. But as Fouad talked about standards in the context of standards, there is no lack of security standards, privacy standards. However, one of the activities that we did was to take a look at the collection of standards and frameworks that exist today, maturity model, as Fao talked about, and to be able to decompose that into essential activities. And we did come up with 5 essential activities that, at a very high level, think of it at a 30,000-foot level, what's the characteristics of a secure organization? And secure development life cycles. And Fouad mentioned some of that earlier in one of his comments. How do we deploy secure components? Because it's not only the software that we put into place, but those third-party software components. And that includes then the supply chain of the product. And last, security is not a one and done. There's a maintenance aspect of that. And so the program contains a number of different areas and attributes that have been decomposed in that, and how we assess that is less of a standard certification. As Stephen said, it's not a no-go aspect of that. We have a 3-step process that first allows manufacturers to go in and do self-assessment. But what we have found, and in my experience, I'm sure with years of FAO doing this as well, we oftentimes find that initially manufacturers don't know where they are in terms of a security maturity or security posture. And so self-assessment's a first step for manufacturers in this program. They get the questionnaire, they have the ability to walk through that. And sometimes they need to do additional work to bootstrap their processes and their development. This is secure by design, being able not only to have those design elements and products in place, but also those organizational processes around that product development process for security. So they get the ability to assess that first. And upon being able to get to a level where they feel that they have the sufficient maturity, then a third-party certification or a third-party audit performed by an outside organization provides that attestation to say, I as a company, yeah, I've got a great secure process, I got a great secure product, and now you have a set of eyes, a third-party eyes looking at it to say, yes, we can attest to that. We can in fact say that we've reviewed that evidence, and that evidence does in fact meet that level. And it's not a go, no go, because there are certain tiering aspects of our program, and we can talk in more detail about that. But that gives us the ability then to understand a very specific security posture for organization and product. The third part of our program is actual physical testing of that device, because as we know, proof is truly in the verification of whether or not you can hack into a product. So if I have the design elements in place, I have the organizational processes in place, and now I can in fact prove that those things have been employed effectively by going through penetration testing, actual physical security testing based on practices that we have seen in international standards that have been very effective at demonstrating that at the product level you have a secure, you have security controls that are in essence, robust against hackers. There's no such thing as a secure product. Stephen says that, we'll repeat that time and time again. And then, again, it's a process. It's not a one and done. Maturities of companies can improve. And so a company coming into the program at say a tier 1 level, which may be appropriate for certain kinds of products, depending upon the information. We talked a lot about what kind of information is being used, how is it being used, what's it being collected. But there may be other products that at that high functionality level are very critical to, privacy, but also to safety. So those could be things such as devices that provide wellness information, or devices that help people with securing their homes or keeping their refrigerators from blowing up, or their stoves from overheating and things of that nature. So there could be products that actually have a very high level of safety associated with breaching the security of that product. So the program is established around that. I'm going to be quiet now. There's a lot more information that we could certainly share, and you can certainly... Yeah, two days. But it is a program that is, again, based on a maturity model, based on international standards and best practices around security.
Thank you very much for
Thank
that.
you.
Rubal, you had the last question, or? Okay, after the break.
Yeah.
So again, here also, Fout, thank you for your leadership and your help here.
Thank you.
And also, this is just one step on the way towards where we need to be. On labeling, what's clear, I mean, we got the different ones, right? Those where it says check, the product fulfills it, like in close, the wool mark. And it's the information on this shares more information, this shares less information, this is, so different levels, like with the eco label, this is very energy efficient, this is less energy efficient, different classes. So that is not, but graduation. And we also invite you very much to engage in that discussion that we try to do also via Slack. And the documents that Wout mentioned will be there as well. So thank you for this. After the break at 3:30, we'd like to continue with the network resiliency. You may think we discussed everything already, but Jordan may surprise you. There is more. And after that, we'll go into the broader discussion, taking stock. So where are we and what's needed next to make sure that we are on track and we achieve something.
Yeah, there's coffee down the hall, and we have some refreshments over here as well.
Okay, thank you much. See you back 5 minutes before 3:30. 4:30, 3:30, yes. we are pretty well on time. So are we also on the agenda? I think so. The next presentation will be on network resilience. And I think again you will find, even more than in the first two, that it does interlink. It's not an in itself standing work stream. So a point that we picked up very much of aligning work across work streams is, I think, one of the things that we'll take back as well in the broader discussion that will follow this. So now the focus on Jordan representing the work by the network resilience stream with discussion, and really looking forward to what you have to bring and what you want from us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I guess I should start by saying that I am with TELUS. We're a large internet service provider in Canada, and that does color the way I see this problem. Okay. I need to use this. All right. While we think of computers or phones as connected devices, there are now more connected objects than phones or computers. And this is the fastest growing segment of devices on the internet. These objects are often made by companies with strong domain expertise, but little cybersecurity background. Okay. So in 2016, a college student named Ja Paris wrote software that took over hundreds of thousands of closed-circuit television cameras that were connected to the internet and used them as part of a mafia-style protection racket. He tried to sell internet-based businesses protection against losing their internet services. If they didn't pay up, he would use the connected computers inside the cameras to flood his victim with garbage internet traffic and prevent legitimate users from getting through. Then he'd asked if they'd changed their mind about paying up. Ja's botnet software, Mirai, set records for the size of this kind of attack and all the sources available online. So the internet is used to take over IoT devices, which in turn launch new attacks. So to break the cycle, we have to protect IoT devices from internet-based threats. Okay. We can either build better, more secure IoT devices, or we can restrict access to them. Improving the security of Internet of Things device software through standards, practices, certification, regulation, and consumer transparency is important. It's important work, and it'll improve the security of IoT devices when they ship, as well as throughout their lifespan. And many of you are engaged in it. We had discussions about that today, and there's broad industry interest. But software security is challenging, and even devices from reputable companies may end up outliving their software support. And well-intentioned companies will ship products that are insecure out of the box. So far, the Networks Resiliency Group has focused on improving access control to IoT devices to make it more challenging for bad actors to take control of them or for suborned devices to do additional harm. So this is our secure gateway project. Okay. CIRA, the .ca registrar, and other participants, including Found's consultancy, are in the Network Resiliency Group have been working together to prototype a home gateway that protects Internet of Things devices and the internet at large, and provides users control over how Internet of Things devices connect. It uses open source code, something called OpenWRT, implements emerging standards, and will contribute back code and standards changes to the community. There are a number of different challenges involved. So before we can restrict access within the home, we need to address a problem. We have given all of our connected devices, all of our house guests, copies of the same key. It's the key to the house and not to a room, and we can't control who goes where or stop our guests from cutting new key copies. And if we change the locks, we must hand out new keys to everyone whom we wish to stay. So this is the password to your Wi-Fi. A better model for us is the hotel, where each guest is given a different key, and when it's time for a guest to check out, we render their key, and only their key, useless. So together with Algonquin College, I have a demonstration of this on Wi-Fi, one network name, but a list of device passwords paired with Wi-Fi device identifiers. Our demo uses an app to generate device passwords, so it also removes the need for the user to remember or read off from the side of their router the Wi-Fi password. Locking passwords to the Wi-Fi device identifiers found in each packet gives a cryptographic guarantee to simple firewall rules that block or pass traffic with this ID. So no Wi-Fi devices can successfully impersonate each other. A new draft standard, the Internet Engineering Task Force's manufacturer's usage description, allows devices to suggest appropriate policies to the network by giving out a link to a policy file. And here the policies are for access control, not the broader policy that we've been talking about. The policy file helps indicate what internet sites the device should have access to or be accessed from, and what traffic types are allowed. Prototyping using it is helping us to address challenges around how to signal the policy file to the network, how the network should treat changes to the policy file that might come as a result of a device upgrade, how a network can seek user approval of or modification to device policy, and what role there can be for third-party security software. This kind of policy management problem is similar to what we see with app permissions on phones and other software upgrades, and there should be lessons that we can learn from those. So in this diagram of the Sierra policy prototype being developed, there is a cloud service that can rewrite the manufacturer policies that we receive. So it gives flexibility to tighten policies based on behavioral analysis or new security vulnerabilities that become public, or to provide policy support even when a manufacturer doesn't. So we're not limited to the manufacturer usage description as a policy source. Okay. The MUD model, the manufacturer's usage description model for getting policy, takes existing public internet access and applies filters to better match the access a device needs. As Internet of Things devices and the cloud services that are dedicated to them proliferate, should we have an end-to-end access control model? Should our public access networks facilitate connecting Internet of Things devices and Internet of Things cloud services together without allowing anyone else to connect to either of them? Okay, so we're prototyping Internet of Things security measures for home and small business. We're intending to contribute back to the Internet Engineering Task Force as well as open source communities to add a missing layer of network-based defense. We're very much open to new ideas. We welcome participation from any stakeholder. So a good first step would be to join us on the Slack channel and then go from there. Okay, that's...
Thank you very much. Beautiful. So this is where we now stand from the network resilience side.
Yeah.
The solution is really found in, we need to further the MUD approach, basically.
Yeah, so there's a few things. So I mean, we have one running demo of the Wi-Fi access control changes, which are just there as a way to, it helps with MUD. It also hopefully, I mean, you can apply MUD without keeping everybody separate in the home, but I think if you want to do a good job, if you want to prevent one device from spying on another, and it helps to have that piece in there. There's a lot of, I don't know the exact state of the MUD demonstrator and how much is really demonstrable, but there's a lot of work in progress on that.
So we're basically, this is being built in real time. So where we are right now is we have the core router functionality, and we have the ability to, we've created QR codes for our mock devices. So for our prototype, which we're going to have ready for the end of this month, we've got a thermostat and we've got a home appliance. And basically the process is you scan it, you get the MUD file. The MUD file gives you what it can, it can't do, what it is. Then you get the per device policy that's then applied to it. And then what we're going to do is, from a demonstration purposes, we're actually going to compromise that device. And then technically it should change operating state, at which point the router should say, hey, you can't talk to my fridge, and should isolate it immediately and notify the user. And that's what we're trying to prototype at the end of this month. And I might eat my words, but me and the boys are working hard to get that done. So that's kind of where we are. We're almost there, but a lot of those pieces are already there. Obviously, there's lots of bugs. And then once we iron that out, we're trying to come up with, engineering first, then coming up with the specification. So we want to actually prove that it works. And so from that perspective is all of those pieces to the QR code tie back to the label. So what we're thinking is creating a specification that when you scan that, it does two things. One, it gets you the MUD file that says all the device spec, but then also that same QR code can take you to a web portal that has all the details from a security privacy perspective. And we're looking to submit an IETF draft specification that basically would make that as a requirement. And then the two pieces basically come together. So not only do you have a label, and you have all of the details. And so I think from that perspective, and coming back to, I think, a point that Stephen had brought up about the counterfeiting, we basically help minimize that to a certain extent, because it becomes a lot more difficult to fake all of that. So to a certain extent, we help minimize it, but then also provide that higher level of assurance to the product that's being connected to our network. So, and then hopefully next year we'll be able to, or November, whatever, when we have our next meetup, I think Jacques is pushing us to have a demonstration for our next meeting. So hopefully it's working by then. Otherwise you'll throw eggs at me.
Yeah, hopefully I can show the other parts.
Okay, so the MUD, who is so the MUD is something that is developed as a kind of open standard for.
MUD's an IETF standard that describes policy, but it doesn't tell you what to do with it or how to do with it. And so part of the exercise is to figure out, okay, great, you've got that. How can you do things that actually secure the home using it? And so FOD's doing a lot of the heavy lifting on that. With my students at Algonquin, even though I work for TELUS, I've been trying to prototype some other pieces around it that at some point we'll steal back a bunch of their code on. But yeah, so we're trying to try it out and see what it actually looks like and
so
what we learned that works.
And what you're gonna do with it? That's basically within this project that we're doing together.
Yeah.
But then we're open sourcing everything.
Yeah.
So all the source code, everything that we're building is being open sourced, including and then also from the specification piece. So the additional part that we're going to create to the MUD specification. Thank you. We will create another specification once we iron out what all the requirements are. That will be another IETF specification that basically has almost like that green box where it says the MUD QR code, and what does that look up and what does that mean? I think Jordan was indicating that the specification right now is totally open to interpretation, like a lot of IETF, and it really allows the engineer to either guidance or potentially shoot yourself in the foot, depending on how you implement it. So what we're trying to do, we're really learning on, okay, what did they actually mean? We actually have been in discuss with the team at Cisco who basically created that specification. Organizations like Samsung have bought into it, and they plan to actually use MUD. Now there's no, just to make you aware, there is no public MUD files right now. However, we're hosting some mock ones on our dev site, and we're using that for the actual trials that we're trying to set up in the short term. But the goal would be to get this adopted throughout the industry, get the vendors to buy into it, and then it becomes another means to basically securely deploy IoT devices. And then what I'll also point out too is we're making it in a way that, for example, you go to Japan or Hong Kong. If you've ever been to the electronic markets there, it's like craziness. You can shop like 7 floors of electronics, and it's heaven. Okay, but I digress. So you go there, you buy all kinds of stuff, and I mean, we hack stuff for a living, so I buy just all kinds of junk, and we tear it apart, we reverse engineer it, and we pull the firmware, and we do all kinds of fun stuff with it. But what we you know, from this perspective, if you buy one of those, you plug it in, it's still going to try to get a MUD file, but that vendor might not exist. So that's why we created the concept of the secondary repository. And in this case, it's the CCTLD. It could be someone else, but in our model, it's a CCTLD. And what that does, it adds additional kind of controls onto the device. So for example, it recognizes that it's got a camera. Okay, so what you can do is we can say, okay, well, it's got a camera, but it wants to talk to a server in Beijing because it came out of a China factory, for example. So the manufacturer, and you're going, I don't want to do that. So what you can do is, I only want to have LAN access. So that means it only stays within the local network and only allows the user to access that locally. It doesn't send anything away. But we also realize that it can't be updated. So, but at the same time, no one can access it except for me. So the what's called the attack surface is restricted considerably. And we also look at the fact that, and part of the specification is when that device changes operating mode, so because we're actively monitoring it, so all of a sudden if it attempts to talk to anything else, it's quickly isolated from the rest of the network. So we take it offline, so it can't be fully weaponized. Yes, it can be weaponized, but the second it attempts to do that secondary call out, it's gone. So those are the kind of things we're putting into the specification. Those are the things we're doing the initial prototypes with, and we're hoping to demonstrate, like I said, later this month.
Yeah, so routing is part of the MUD in a way as well.
Sorry, I have a question about if it doesn't get updates. So how do you get security updates or patches? If
Good job, Tom.
There's two parts to it. So if it's a product that's fully, I'm going to just pick on Samsung again. So it's a fully developed product that's for the consumer market by Samsung. One of the first things it does is it attempts to do the call home to update it. That's the first thing we attempt to do with the device. If it's a device that's no longer, because if you look at the actual lifespan for most of these products, it's 12 to 18 months. And that's it. A lot of the vendors are basically end-of-lifing them after that point. So what we're basically saying is, okay, for that period, yes, you're going to have full patching, updating, but after that, you potentially won't. So what we're doing is, okay, you now still have that device on your network. For example, if you put security cameras all around your home, you're not just going to tear them out in a year and a half. You're going to leave them there probably for a few years until they actually fail, have an in-field service failure. So the way we looked at it from a threat perspective is, okay, we still want that to give us the camera perspective, but we don't want it to potentially call home anymore because there's no home to really call to. So take away that attack surface so someone can't fake that and send something to me, and then just restrict it so I can only have access in the home and I can view the video from home. That's it. And that's how we protect the consumer, that's how we protect the device, and that's how we protect the internet infrastructure from it turning ugly and attacking the internet.
Yep, of course.
So from a consumer education perspective, would it then make sense still to say as part of the key messages or as a tip, look at how the manufacturer gives patches or updates if we are implementing this system at the same time?
If I should come and stand beside you. So maybe the easier way would be to, like when we open source this, I think maybe one of the positioning things would be is, does your router support these features? So what we came to the realization was the home router is a critical element in the whole infrastructure piece. And so because of that, if we basically can create a router that provides those services, we can basically eliminate the attack surface.
Okay. Alan? Oh, no, sorry, Hussein was first. He was waving before. Keep that mic for later.
Thank you, John, for a great presentation, and I'm glad that that the work has been developed since our last conference call. I think it's quite impressive. I think it's a very positive direction that we are extending the MUD protocol and putting a layer in for network protection. I see the open source implementation as an example implementation. Typically, vendors do compete in the way they implement these features, and they have some proprietary extensions to give them an edge over other vendors. So I think the having an example implementation is good for testing and showing functionality, but I don't think we're trying to promote a specific implementation that vendors should look at. Correct? So I think the protocol extension is fine. Whatever we can get in terms of advice and have to reduce the threat target or threat target, yes, is quite useful. But the way you implement, usually that's why the ITF specification is vague, because every vendor interprets it in a specific way and does his own tweaking to give himself an edge in terms of functionality and provisioning.
So in a way, how do we come from here to something that is fully reliable and we can trust on as consumers to protect our devices and our networks?
Right, so that's a big part of the second. So there's MUD right now, and then once we can validate all the different aspects of what we're trying to do from this framework, then we would create the second specification for the industry that basically has all of those things on what we're trying to do from IoT per device protocol protection.
As a protocol extension, not as an implementation
that's right.
specification.
That's right.
Protocol extension is fine.
Yeah, but again, we want to make it through IETF, and we want to basically anything that we develop through this is to basically open source it to the community as well. Yep.
Ellen, you're good.
That was really interesting. I like the attack surface reduction and segmentation tricks you're pulling here. It's an innovative approach. I was curious, though, if you went for non-greenfield approaches and things that would be a little more tactical rather than something like this, which would take a lot of time to evolve into the marketplace.
Okay, so I mean, if you are trying to apply policy, there is a certain amount of room to have different hints. If you had there might be security vendors that might be able to build up profiles of existing devices and provide that to a router to try to restrict access without it necessarily coming officially from the manufacturer as an official MUD file. We have not. There's nobody in the group doing that strongly. Is that fair to say? Yeah. So I mean, there might be actors, if there was anybody in the room who happened to know how to, I mean, I can think of some people in the community, in the wider security community, who'd be able to build, who'd have product that would help you do that, maybe, or be able to build one. But so far, there's nobody sitting down and saying, I'll help you with that. Please join us if you.
So this is a possible solution. But what the time path would be with this before it's effective? Taking the MUD definition first, the secondary definition building on that second, and implementation by vendors, and maybe even enforcement by government requiring this.
Yeah, I think that's why if you look at CIRA, they consider the security and resiliency of the internet in Canada a key aspect. So from their perspective, and I'm speaking completely out of turn for Jacques, but I mean, just based on my discussions and the project that we've had for 4 months, is by creating this, we create that secondary repository that I think addresses that question. So anything that, I mean, yes, this solution is greenfield, but if someone's there, if someone then takes our specification, builds it into the router platform, whether that's Linksys or Cisco or whoever it might be, can take that specification and say, hey, we're going to embed this, and we're going to point to Sierra because they actually have a repository, or they're going to point to company XYZ because they have a repository, and they have that ability to do that and provide that level of service within their product. And so someone who is shopping around can just look for that feature if we provide them the education that this feature is something that's being built into routers. So if you look at router technology and feature sets, say 10 years ago, if you look at the things that were there wasn't a lot of security kind of aspects. I mean, it was admin, it was hard-coded into your system. You could never change that. Over time, we've learned that you've got to be able to change it. You've got to be able to put in all kinds of security configuration into the actual router because it's an attack surface. So the industry has learned and is moving. So from the same kind of perspective, if we provide those kind of, here's how you do it, here's how you can embed it, and we open it to the marketplace, then the marketplace is driven by the consumer if they're actually going to buy into that or not.
So timeline-wise?
So if our goal right now, we're trying to get the prototype done by the end of next month, with our initial kind of demonstrations at the end of this month. And then once we do that, then we're going to pull back and say, okay, well, at the same time we're doing this, we're also doing what's called a functional specification. Anyone who's around engineering kind of knows what that is. And then from that, we're deriving our outputs. And so part of that will then be to start to draft what we think that IETF specification is going to be. And so we say, okay, this is working, this is not working, and then we'll probably submit the first draft later this year, early next year,
Already.
and then we would just then be updating it as we start to build our actual full working product that we hopefully get to trial next summer.
Jordan?
Yeah, so we've got, probably at the next meeting, I'll try to do a little demo of the Wi-Fi 10 every different key thing. I guess I'm going to go to this slide, which unfortunately, because all my slides have no content on them, doesn't say much, but if there's anybody who's interested in sort of a more full, the discussion on how do we build end-to-end access control, so that you can deploy your cloud service for IoT and you can deploy your IoT devices and they, see as little of public internet as possible. That's I think an interesting conversation and maybe something that we could try to do some prototyping on. But I'd love to have some perspective on that from somebody who isn't me. So.
Taylor?
Yeah, I think we're not necessarily coming up with like prescriptive implementation advice, but I do think we need that critical mass of buy-in, and I think this is where we take the work that you guys have had to the next level, which is using this as the success of this initiative has always been built into just getting everyone in the same room. So now, I know that from the planning committee's perspective, we'll have to, many people have heard me say this, but we'll have to revisit and make sure we're engaging all the right industry stakeholders, and then encourage them also to take, to take this kind of back home to their own engineering teams, because I assume that we'd almost even want them part of this pitch, this demo, if you guys actually need, as far as folks involved, like the IoT lab at Carleton University, to like test this and verify it and help build it. I think this is the opportunity. I know it's been going on within your group to date, and then so we might as well use this initiative to hit as many people as possible and get as many people involved as possible. And
Who runs the IoT lab?
the IoT lab, his name's Mohammed something. I can't remember his last name, but he's actually the SHRC chair on IoT right now, like the Cisco SHRC chair. So we've sent him emails, I believe, through the initiative.
I know who he's talking about.
Yeah.
He's also the Cisco IoT chair. But he's based at Carleton University. They've got a lab. They've got grad students who are doing a lot of security research and things like that. I am aware of, and I am connected to him for some projects that we've been involved with previously. So I can definitely reach out to him, and I agree with just the perspective that we need to have more people. But what we wanted to do was just at a concept level, like you have to just maybe step back a little bit. Conceptually, we're saying, does this make sense? Okay, and that's really where we are, is does this make sense from an industry perspective? And if we do that, what is the implications? So when we saw MUD, or when Jacques saw MUD and went through it, he was like, since last year, Jacques started talking to me, do you see this thing MUD? And I'm like, no, I don't know. And he said, no, you got to go read MUD. And he just started bugging me about reading MUD. And I said, okay, I'll go read MUD. He goes, you got to know about MUD. This thing is going to change, like IoT and security. I'm like, no, nothing's ever done that. So that's why and then he said, okay, listen, would you be interested in kind of working on this? I said, yeah, this, it sounds like fun. And when we started seeing more and more weaponizing of everything, especially healthcare devices and things like that, I'm like, okay, let's try to find a way to do this. And that's where we started with the MUD specification as the baseline, because it was a good starting point. And so since that point, we said, okay, well, MUD's good, but we need the secondary kind of aspect that we need to kind of create for the industry as well. And what I really like about Jacques' approach is he wants to just make this free. He wants to get everyone involved with it, but let's just prove that it can work first and then make it available to everyone to contribute. And that's why we're going IETF for the second specification.
Yeah, I think if I also may speak for you, it's not questioning whether this is a good concept or not. I think it appeals a lot, but realistically it means it will take 5 to 10 years before it really has impact, right?
Potentially, yeah. I mean, if we build the prototype this year and we actually test it, and then we put it out there, it's really up to router manufacturers to decide if they want to adopt it. There is, I think, can we bring our own router product to the market, or how do we do it? Those kind of things, but those are future kind of considerations. We don't actually know what we would do after that point, but really it's proving, is there a need for it? How does this protect, and does it bring any value to the market and to the industry?
But I think there is, I mean, I guess the question is, if we're building in, Sierra is already building in that third-party hinting. Should we try to have one that's based on, instead of being based on MUD, based on some known vulnerability to say, okay, this device, we know that this device has this problem, and push, push some ACL policy based on that, just as a demonstrator, as part of the demonstrator. Should we have that be something that we're showing off?
Yeah, I would say so. Will we get it ready for the end of this month?
Right,
that would be tight.
Might be for November, sure.
But that's something definitely for consideration. So if there's a 0-day or a CVE that's announced, potentially we would have to look at aspects on the Sierra or the secondary MUD repository, being able to do real-time, like AI, determining risk, do the lookup, CVE for this device, and then updating the secondary piece, and then being able to push that down immediately.
Yeah, and I guess the other obvious approach is using, basically if you have this deployed in a lot of routers, you've got lots of devices, you can see their behavior over time. You can do that behavioral analysis, and then you can push it in. So it might be a good student research project or something if we wanted to stick that in. But that's not if somebody wants to jump in and say, yeah, I want to lead that, that's great. So far, we're just trying to get some basic stuff working, right? So, yeah.
Okay, I guess it's partly a question for this session or for the next, but is, in full appreciation, I think my intuition says this is great. And we already touched upon that during the first webinar with Andrew as well, but maybe very much the needed part of a solution and what follows this. And it will take time. And I see, I appreciate the resources that are put to it, including from Cisco and others at IETF. Is this what the network resilience stream in Secure IoT Canada is focusing on? Or is there also other activities that are done based on what we can do today as well?
So when I think what we looked at was what were the things that we could do to basically protect the devices from the internet and the internet from the devices. And so when we started to pull back and said, okay, what were the things we could influence the most? We thought, okay, the router or the router platform or the home edge network was the single most critical thing. Because if you look at, once the packets are past that point, you're into a carrier environment. And so at that point, it's up to the carrier to then kind of manage bits and bytes through things like clean pipes and other technologies like that. So we said, okay, what is happening based on some of the attacks we've seen so far. And what we've seen is the weaponizing of home devices, and then those devices basically being amplifiers. So also add to that most networks in our country now, you're getting gig Ethernet to your home. And so now that device with potentially an Ethernet interface with a gig interface, and it's got a 32-bit CPU on it, it can generate a lot of packets that is putting on the internet that someone's got to deal with. And so if we can basically take away that, we can basically eliminate a big part of the attack surface.
So
and
home routers.
that's why home routers, and that's why we kind of focused in what would be the implementation of such a technology. And that's kind of how we came for this to be. The other aspect, just a sec there, Taylor. The other aspect too, there's just a little smidget of the application, and Jacques' goal to the team was to basically simplify the complex aspects of a router and the security from the end user. And that's part of the goal, is how do we isolate all of that complexity, like the user from a per policy, and all of the different technical aspects that we do from an engineering piece should be isolated from the user. Really, you can add a device, know it's compromised, and basically turn it off is really what we want to do. And if you want to access it remotely, that's another thing you kind of turn on. Everything else you cannot really touch, which means you cannot basically misconfigure. So we're taking that away potentially from the user, and again, putting that into the specification.
So, and having the national network providers commit to it would help.
That's right.
So
That's
you
right.
can accelerate
That's right.
take up on that level. Okay.
Yeah.
Very well understood. Taylor?
So to answer what you had mentioned before, so one of the other things we identified at the previous meeting was a white paper essentially outlining the successes and lessons learned from this process. But the more it's so useful, I think, to have all of these working groups in succession in person. What we're identifying, or what's kind of becoming clearer and clearer in my mind, is essentially a suite of products that span essentially the life cycle of devices. So the way that we had outlined the problem in the consumer awareness and education working group, you know, before you purchase a device, when you operate it, and then what happens if there's an issue. Basically, you could fit the pieces that are being addressed by both the secure home gateway itself, the creation of the repository, the application, the standard, the testing, the label, and then maybe what we're getting to also and what I think we were getting to in the consumer education is not so much key messages, but consumer behaviors that we want to support, and also consumer or ways, mechanisms to support behavior. So everything is really coming together in my mind. I know that's the next topic of conversation, but because this is so complementary to what we've already been discussing. And so to me, that even though we have identified, to your original question, a white paper as an additional product that this working group would focus on, you know, maybe that's just the paper that is the outcome document for this, for the initiative as a whole.
Just think we don't have the illusion that everything will be ready by April and will be fully secure.
But that would be great, because none of us are working on the white paper.
Good. Hussein?
Just thinking out loud, maybe one way of implementation is not modify the router itself, but have an appliance, separate appliance that does the protocol extension, and then can act as a separate, do a firewall as an appliance. And in this case, then even the implementation can be easier. Instead of relying on existing router manufacturers to adopt the extension of the protocol, you can do this in a separate device. And if its functionality is quite simple and straightforward, maybe the cost is quite manageable. And even from a deployment perspective, then, as mentioned, service providers can then compete and have this solution done on top of whatever IoT solution they're selling, have this part of the securing the IoT cloud in a private home. So as a separate appliance instead of integrated into an existing router.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely a lot of different implementation options. Right now, we're not so much focused on market or commercialization of this, right? That's not really the focus of what we're trying to do. We're trying to just figure out from, from an IoT risk and risk management perspective of the ISPs and the telecoms, is there a way for us to mitigate the risk? And so this is the concept that we came up with to basically do that. And so I agree. There's multiple ways for commercialization, but that wasn't part of the goal of like the mini project that we have right now. It's really just to say, can we create a specification that basically drives this, and then figure out where to go from there.
Excellent. Other questions? So basically, but that's what the name says as well, network resilience. We hear at the network layer how we can secure that to prevent further spread of the risks. And that complements obviously very well to the steps that you said. First look at the networks, and then the routers, and then look at the devices itself, ultimately. Any final words from you, Jordan?
No, I think we're always looking for fresh blood. So if you want to, this was interesting, we talk every week. Join the Slack channel. Join a discussion. We'd love your help.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, this is good stuff. It's always the tension of I want it now. They must make a song about that or something. I want it all. I want it now. And that won't happen. So the next half hour I'm going to take you through is like, okay, we've heard the work that has been progressing. That's one of the elements I love. That whether continue to keep that. And the second thing that we picked up was alignment of the work across the work streams. And there may be other elements. So that's one. The second thing I would like to ask your thoughts about is the process. So we've got these meetings. The next meeting is going to be on 20 November. And the intent is to have 2 or 3 more meetings after that to come to a point where we say, okay, now we have this white paper or this ideas about this is what should be done. Government, industry, network providers, end users. There's more that needs to be done before we're at that point, that we get that clarity. A tool is the webinars that we've had, and for I've been in there. The first one was really about network resilience, the second one about education, and the third one about labeling. 3 different kind of webinars as well, all with their advantages and disadvantages. So what did you like, what don't you like? Are webinars a useful thing? Do we need to have more of them? Do we have different teams? I'd love your thoughts there. And the last part is, of course, also we've got Slack. Now, Slack invites reactions, invites people to participate. But the more there is to react on, the more reactions you will get. So how can we use that platform? Is it useful? Do you think something else would be better? How do we share our work and progress work together? So on those 3 elements, I'd like to have your opinions. Drinks aren't ready before another hour. Hussein? Do you have sound back there? Okay. They have sound, so okay. They record it.
All right.
So I think in general work is progressing quite well. I find the webinar were quite useful. Maybe we could consider at some point face-to-face meetings on the subgroup level, not necessarily at the big group, but the education folks interested in education have a contribute can meet together face-to-face, and similarly the other two subgroups. I think that would be useful because some aspects require some face-to-face interaction over the intranet, over Slack, or even a conference call. There are some limitations.
My microphone gone?
So face-to-face interaction, I think, would be especially if you're trying to edit text or come up with a specific concept. That's where you have to be in the same room working on pen and paper, the old classic way. I wanted to add a comment regarding the awareness and education group. One of the initial areas of interest at the group is to have messages that are geared to different demographies of consumers. Because an educated consumer is different than a person of older age or youth and youngsters. And particularly in the youth and youngster space, they are now more and more users of these smart devices. And they are as vulnerable as any other category, if not more. And the message that should be relayed to them will be, I think, quite different than the messages that we relay to other adults or even elderly citizens. So I think the demographic part, we need to work on it to have the picture completed. Not necessarily from day one. I think having a general message is fine, and then we try to tailor it in a following effort to different groups of consumers. Not to be distracted.
Thank you, Hussein, for this comment about the demographics. So far, from what you have seen from the messages that we have been discussing and we have put forward, it's more still at the general, like it's more for the general public, for the general consumers. And we were more in the thought that that would be just better because anyone who's going to buy this IoT device will go to that source in the future and find this information, and it will become maybe a little bit complicated if we try to divide it for the youth, the seniors, the certain like demographics. What do you guys think? Because I'm really opening it up, and I'm more in the view of keeping it general to the general consumers at this point on IoT devices that are specific to the home or small businesses. But I would like to hear more from the group what they think about that. And if you want it to be more specific, then how can you help in catering these messages to specific groups? Because we need people to help us with also these messages. Then.
My response to that is almost a broader theme that I think might help, especially with the messaging group, I think, or the consumer education group. Figuring out what each subgroup is kind of working towards, and really, like I feel like the third group, the network resiliency group, has done a very good job of kind of saying, okay, this is the thing we're trying to accomplish. Whereas I look at something like the consumer education group, and it seemed to be unclear of, are we trying to identify what information needs to be on each IoT device? Or are we creating, key messages for consumers around the IoT in general? Like, these are the kind of things you should be thinking about when you're considering IoT devices kind of writ large. And that kind of thing, like the writ large thing, that might be tailorable to demographics. Whereas, if we're trying to identify the key information that needs to be available for each IoT device, maybe that's not a demographic thing. So having those really strongly defined end goals that we're actually trying to accomplish in each of these groups, I think is going to help define the work going forward. I would largely recommend that. I mean, in my head, I see the consumer education group being that broader piece of kind of educating people about what the IoT is and what kind of privacy considerations you should have around the IoT generally. And then the labeling working group is the one that's kind of more thinking about, okay, how do we communicate information about each specific device? That's just how I have it separated.
Well, yeah. So that's kind of what I was thinking also when I was looking at the labeling report versus the key messages table, because it was more that those messages, the key things you need to know, are built in or would be built into a certification process, and it would be a matter of conveying that and having it as information that can be conveyed. And more what we're talking about at the ownership are more behaviors that we want to enforce, and these are the general type of tips and tricks for being a conscious consumer. And I mean, we mentioned, well, what do people need to know when they're operating a smart home environment? Well, I don't know why no one brought it up before, but if you're a parent and your kids come over and they're now under the guise of your smart system, they're now being listened by your sensors, right? So that's information that people are not yet aware of, and behaviors. There'll be certain behaviors that we'll want to support in that. So we're almost looking more at consumer behaviors, and I believe that is a general application that would apply to everyone and anyone who would operate these devices.
Just a thought. We had at coffee, we were having little discussions on the same topic with the education piece. And I don't have the slide up in front of me, but our sort of thought is already educating the public about privacy and security risks is a large undertaking to do in a really straightforward manner and making it understandable. So then once you include some of the other contractual and what was the other one? There's two other elements. Copyright. I'm wondering if that's sort of getting too far in the weeds for the typical consumer, that we want to understand how they can protect themselves and not necessarily, copyright or contractual considerations. I mean, at the end of the day, like you were saying, in terms of you don't want consumer stuff to go down into the terms and service. Ideally, you want there to be layered notices or policies that are written in a way so people can really clearly understand this is the collection of your information that's going to happen. This is how we're going to use it. This is how we're going to protect it. That's an ideal. It's obviously not always the case. But is that what was being addressed with the contractual piece? Like I said, I focused mostly on the first two, but.
Ruba?
For the contractual piece, especially for the functionality part, it's about does the consciousness of the consumer when they're going to buy and purchase an IoT device, to ask the question, does the device do what it's supposed to do? So by knowing what are the questions, the key questions to ask before you purchase it, because once you purchase it, it's almost a bit too late. So the main fourth thing that they're looking at is interoperability. If they purchase this device, is it going to be operable with other devices that they have? If they want to repair it, do they have the right to repair it, or do they have the right to give it to a third party to repair it? If they want to dispose of it, what is it in their contract, how they can dispose of it or not? It's more in the weed of here you have this product, what are your contractual agreement with the manufacturer or the vendor itself. We feel it's not going to be a complete picture if we are just talking about security and privacy. So here's how you secure. Here's an IoT device. We're almost taking the consumer by the hand, step by step, trying to help them through this awareness program from you're going to buy it, so what are the key things that you have to ask? Whether it's about security, whether it's about privacy, or whether about the product itself. How do you know that it's going to operate with another device, or that you can make copies of it or not? Things like that.
So
if there is a lock-in, or just one example that's really important is if there is a lock-in. So you have digital lock-in. You have this device and suddenly it's not going to be operating in a few years. Okay, would you be able to know about it beforehand? We feel it's a more comprehensive. If we're just going to talk about security and privacy, or security just in the sense of privacy, that we are really not giving the full picture to the consumer who's going to buy this device.
I think the backing of the whole system, both in what rights do a consumer have to get redress, as how you back it up in society with possible legislation, or has not been addressed yet. So I can see the value of that to back up the whole system. Your point whether it should be the focus of consumer education is something that you could also bring in the work of the group, and really urge you to participate in that as well. Please.
Just a quick question. Who is it envisioned will be the conduit through which the consumer education is done? Is it just consumer affairs, or is there a broader idea for what this program would look like and how it would be delivered?
Is that discussed already?
So far, we haven't discussed the delivery yet. What we are aiming for, at least, to have a framework, a product, or a toolkit that we can present. And we would like to see something in the future that comes out of it. We don't want to just shelf it and not do anything with it. But for now, at least, we want to focus on what are these messages, or do we want messages, or do we want tips, or do we want it as, Taylor, what did you call it? Behavior, consumer behavior. So we have to still decide on these things before, but at least we have decided, from what my feeling here from the room today is, we came up with few things. We are going to focus on what type of device, which is more IoT devices for consumers, like small devices, home devices, and small business devices. At least we had limited the scope to that. The feeling is also that we are going to focus it on the general, so anyone who is going to buy an IoT home device, at least it's going to be a general audience instead of just specific, so we can move on forward, like there is a step forward here. And then the third thing is, what are the messages? As for the three aspect, resiliency, what's the other two? Resiliency, labeling, and education. This has been set from the beginning. We have been working on it. And it does tie up. You're a consumer from the beginning, from the moment you buy this device to the moment that you are securing it and you're caring about your privacy with the IT. We're trying to give that comprehensive message to it. But the delivery is not yet decided on. But we want to see something happening from it. Of course, we don't want just to do nothing with it. But at least now the focus is on that toolkit for the decision makers, and to go forward.
It's noted for sure. Both the different consumers group we talked about and the conduits for education, it's to be done. So this is an excellent point to bring this up. Alan?
Yes, so I'd like to go back just to the previous point about the messages. I don't know, I think the Globe and Mail has a style guide, in New York Times or something for journalists, which says in the first paragraph, if they only read that, they'll get the most important point in the article. And if they read the second paragraph, they get the second most important point, and they go on and go on and go on. So having a debate about how long the article is, I think that's part of the debate. I think really the debate should be the ordering of the messages. All right. So for example, I think that security should be the most important message. I certainly agree that functionality is important, but I think you really have to think through the ordering of the messages. What's the most important information that I'm trying to communicate? And that would be, I guess, my comment. So, and also just back to the question of the market, and also trying to put some kind of lines across the three groups. Obviously, the devices that there are the most of, that actually proliferate, light bulbs and webcams, all right, are also the greatest threat vector in terms of internet, right? They're not worried about compromised robots in auto plants. They're worried more about webcams, those simple issues. So I think if we try and draw some lines across that, it focuses us on basically what are there the most of, right? And that's, I think, what we should be focusing on. Should we have messaging specifically for refrigerators? I don't think so, right? Maybe webcams, maybe thermostats, things around that, okay? And think to say, what's the most important thing that consumers should know when they're going into the store? Thanks.
Excellent. Okay, may I have just the
That's
opportunity
also-
to answer?
Sorry, this also relates to network resilience. I think it's where's the low-hanging fruit, where can we make the first impact, right?
I totally agree with you, and of the ordering of the message and the prioritizing of it. And there is a process of thinking that went into why, if you saw in the slide, that's why we put privacy first, security second, and functionality third. The reason behind it is we have done a scan of the literature on what is out there and of the surveys that are going on. So, for example, Pew surveys and all of that. So we have, if you recall, that we have it online on the Google Drive, some of the numbers and the figures that we found out of what is the most important for a consumer. So from the surveys that were done nationally and internationally, the numbers were higher. For example, the concerns, the privacy concern just trumped the security concerns out of like just statistics-wise. For example, you can look at the surveys that were done just the past few years, and it seems that the number were 78% of Canadian consumers responded to the privacy concerns. While if you compare it to the security concern, it was, for example, 68% of Canadians are concerned about the security of IoT devices. Because of that, that was the reasoning behind the ordering that we had of the privacy, security, and functionality, because also the functionality came at the lowest of 56%. So if you, if anyone feels, not just you particularly, but if anyone feels that security should come first, that there has to be a reason behind, like maybe numbers, statistics. Yeah. Yes.
Just and just to remind you, it's first to at this point is to raise points that we haven't addressed yet, and to take it home to the working group and consider then. So. What different do we have different messages for different consumers group? What conduits would we use in the end? And maybe something about prioritizing messages.
No, I totally
because
agree with you that we have to think about it.
So,
thank you. I'd just like to comment quickly. I apologize, I haven't looked at the data. I suspect it was based on public opinion research, all right? So, but to look at the cross groups, right? How many of them mention network security being a concern? You see, to take this to an absurd end, if you only addressed privacy and did nothing for security, then that does nothing for networks. Okay, so I take your point how you started it. I think it's intellectually valid, but I think we have to look to the point of view of trying to integrate these issues, right? And that's where there certainly is an intersect between privacy and security. I completely agree. But the other absurd end is I can have a completely secure device certified by the labeling group, whatever, and basically their privacy policy is we're selling every scrap of data we have, right? But at least it's secure. So we have to find the nexus between all of these. And so that's why I would encourage a focus on privacy where it intersects with security. Thank you.
Is this on this subject as well?
Yeah, I just have a question about the literature review and related to what Alan just said. Was it borne out in your review that people were more concerned about their data being resold or shared than their devices being secure at all?
Sorry, I appreciate the discussion, but I think this is consumer education discussion alone. I would suggest you would have that in the consumer education group.
Do it in the Slack channel.
and not to try to get all the answers here. But the concerns are well understood, I think, right?
Yes, definitely. And we can share again this slide so that you can see where the data is on page 7, and there are categories under each of them. So whether it's privacy, what kind of privacy concerns, there are 3 categories. Security, there are 3 categories as well. And by no means this is a comprehensive literature review. It just was a starting point, and we focus also mainly to see Canadian consumers, what they are thinking. So there isn't a lot also of of public opinion reviews that are systematic across privacy issues plus security issues plus functionality. So this is what we could come up with. But yeah, I appreciate that.
Oh, the other one. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Other points? Another point? Okay, then you're welcome, Hussein.
Thank you. On the labeling side, I think the work is quite impressive, and I think there's a good opportunity to have hopefully have an impact. And we rely a lot on standards, certification, and certification. The comment was made that 90% of the devices are made in different jurisdictions, potentially mainly out of China. How effective would be our approach given this reality? Will it be the responsibility of consumer protection here in Canada to certify the devices before they get to the Canadian market, or are we going to investigate Chinese factories? And most probably these factories will be on the smaller side, not of the bigger chains. So how realistic is our approach to have an impact?
Yeah, I don't see anybody jumping up to give the answer, but basically going global is part of the answer, right? In your standard setting. Would you like to talk about? Please.
So I've been given authority to talk about this. So as you know, CSA has started the pilot for the CVP program. And one of the groups that basically is driving this is BC Hydro. So BC Hydro has an initiative because they're recommending products to go into the home. And so their biggest fear when they approached CSA last year was, hey, we're recommending stuff, so are we liable for that? And that was the question that they came to CSA with. And the response was, we actually don't know. We're not lawyers, we're testers. And so we said, okay, but how do we evaluate that? How do we actually know? And that's basically how the CVP came to be. So I think, to come back to your point, yes, that product can come from China, it can come from anywhere. We don't really care where it comes from, because even if you buy a US product, in all likelihood, the componentry could be from China with parts from South Korea or Japan or wherever, and it could be manufactured in the Philippines, and the software basically comes from the United States, but the servers are hosted in the EU. So the program basically allows you to evaluate all those different components, because you're looking at the third party, you're looking at the cloud hosting, you're looking at where it's been manufactured, you're looking at where it's been testing, and it gives you that overall perspective. So because you've got an organization like BC Hydro, and the other utilities are looking at this model as well, but I'm just kind of using them as an example, that they're basically saying, okay, if we're going to recommend this thermostat, then it's going to go through this process, right? So, but what they're doing is they're saying that we've vetted this product. They're saying this product has gone through a certain vetting process, and as a result of it, now has a sticker that says it's got a certain operating level and assurance to the end user that it's gone through the evaluation. Consumer, coming back to the awareness, goes to the shelf to buy that product, and they see it's got this stamp on it saying, hey, we recommend this for use, whatever, and that's where they want to get to, that they say, okay, go buy this product because we're recommending it to you, that you're buying it with the assurance that someone's done the due diligence. Okay? Consumer isn't a techie. Consumer is just like, hey, I want this thing because it's going to save me energy on my home, HVAC usage. And that's what I'm concerned about, bringing down that cost. And so they get the product they want. They know that the assurances are done, and it's coming from someone who they recognize. And those are the key elements. So they've done that. But if you get that product that comes in, doesn't have any of that kind of messaging or anything on it, then you know it probably hasn't gone through the same process. Again, it comes back to the awareness component. So if the awareness component's not there to teach the consumer about what's been done, what's not been done, that's why it's so key, that process.
So my understanding is, just trying to understand, it will be then the responsibility of the service provider, for example, to certify or make sure that the supply chain is trustworthy before it offers this as to consumer basis. If Bell Canada wants to sell an IoT smart home solution, then it has to certify that all the components supply chain has been verified to be secure and trustworthy before it puts it in the market. Correct? Go ahead.
Right. One element of an attestation program, a certification program, which is couched in security standards, is about managing your supply chain and managing all of those introduction points across your supply chain where malware can be introduced or alternate components that have vulnerabilities can be introduced. And so that, through a certification program, that would be one thing that manufacturers would be able to have attestation, that they have within their organizations those vendor evaluations, vendor monitoring, component evaluations and monitoring, that they have code mechanisms to maintain code in its configuration when it's hosted places like on cloud servers, so even service providers as well. And so that mark, as Foud is indicating, would say that if I, as an organization of an IoT connected device, have met a certain level of requirements, that includes those activities in there. And that's the process element of maintaining that cybersecurity hygiene of that device across its entire life cycle. All the way from manufacturing, and that would include anyone who touches the device, including installers, including code that gets updated on the device.
Yes, I guess we are getting closer to the end, and we'll allow one more intervention there. But one of the points that we do here is, I asked the question 5 to 10 years. Well, we know that the industry is looking for solutions. We know that consumer interest in trust is increasing hand over hand because of the abuse that's happening and becomes more visible as well. So it could be gearing up, and maybe one of the things we need to add is how we're going to rattle the international cages to get this adopted swiftly. Having it to be an ITF standard is an excellent first step in that, I think. But after that, don't forget that also multilateral discussions on this are going up as well. And maybe, I know from a business perspective that's a dangerous route, but maybe we can also benefit from that and see whether that may be something. So I would add that to the points of long-term perspective. So how do we get this going? It's clear if we just focus on Canada, it may be very difficult to get something that's secure for Canada. So, last speaker.
So I'm actually was just going to raise almost that exact same point. Like when we say, is the group addressing priority areas, I think it could almost be a working group in and of itself, or at least should be a sub-goal of every existing working group, is defining how we're going to get to adoption of each of these things. It's all well and good to create a label, but how are we going to get to adoption? It's the same question of what are the conduits for consumer education? So I feel like that needs to be a priority. That we can't just create something. It has to be something that we believe is going to be adopted.
Actually, that's an excellent point, and also something that in a way is already foreseen by going to a public together with at least NTIA and maybe others after this process. So, point noted. Do people agree there needs to be a new stream on this? Does this make sense? Can I raise hands for those who agree? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It doesn't automatically mean you're committed to it for the rest of your life. So, but it's a different focus than the content focuses of the different work streams, I think. So, I see a volunteer to take the stream forward. Taylor.
No, I think as a bottom-up, participant-driven initiative, no one should participate in this initiative if they wouldn't actually invest. Everyone's already invested their time because they are seeking to adopt and to implement. This is a shared responsibility, collaborative effort. And so I think it is ultimately the responsibility of everyone in this room to adopt and to make all efforts to adopt and to grow this room and to grow this membership. Otherwise, we're doing something wrong and we need to change the outcomes that we're working towards.
Yeah, I think there's two things. One thing is how we work together to make this happen. The other thing is how we get actually an effective strategy out there to take all those that are not in the room or not even on our network lists also along. But appreciate your call, which is an excellent input for the next part, which you are doing, Tom? No, Tom is not doing it. It's the any other business part. Basically, this process has been facilitated by ISOC, and they've had the support of a planning committee at their request to help plan meetings. Is there any needs that come up, like, I'd like more of this, I'd like less of that? How can the process be improved? That's the question, right?
Essentially, yeah.
And there's your project manager, so take one of the mics. Just one is enough.
Yeah, I'm open to any input. Does anybody have anything?
Fout.
Yeah, I'm gonna well, I know this project was kind of set up as a 1-year kind of run rate, but what I'm hearing today, because if we're saying we need to do the stuff to get to adoption and the outputs that we need to create, this is going to have to go more than 1 year, because we're going to have to create those things, and then we're going to have to create, how do we measure, are we successful with the messaging? Where is labeling going? What are the new standards that are coming out? Because there's a lot of different standards being worked on right now that we can't necessarily reference because they're still in that kind of raw state. So what are those elements? What is happening with resilience or the new attack vectors that are happening that we need to potentially consider in the other frameworks that we're working on? So I think, there is, what do we deliver for the end of this? And then do we reconstitute this group in some way, shape, or form that continues it going with a longer, say, 2 to 3 year mandate on top of this, to say, here's the additional aspects that need to continue. And maybe that is, here's what Canada's done, and we then say, here's how we do it internationally now. So now we bring the Canadian perspective, here's what we've done in Canada, here's what we bring to the EU, and then here's what we bring to the United States, and I think grow that perspective. And then that helps from the international perspective to show us as a leader, show this is how we kind of created this, and then that movement in the market. Just an idea.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. I'd have to escalate that above my pay grade. But yeah, point noted, and maybe that can be something that we address at our next meeting.
I think it's a good question indeed, and it's the aim now, I think, where we stand at this moment, and we may change that, but is realistically getting to a white paper we feel makes a difference to consumer protection. In that, I think what we talked about so far is to aim it to help consumers making better choices on one hand, and to help suppliers empowering consumers with secureable devices that are well labeled and certified. I think that's where we stand now. If we can get that by April, I think we've made a big step. But it shouldn't be the last step. I hear you there. Any other remarks? Ben?
I'd just like to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who participated today. Special thanks to Martin, who came a very long way to be here, especially with us today. And thank you to all the leads of the working group. You can see there's a lot of work going on, and this is all personal time. And we're really encouraged by the participation, and we've got a lot of great government colleagues who've come around, which is great. So I think we're very encouraged by the participation and leadership that everyone is showing. So thank you, and thank you again, Martin.
And thank you for inspiring this. It is really about bringing the different government departments together with the different parts of industry. And it's a real pleasure to be here and see this going. So, Tom, thanks for that. Last word for you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So now we'll have a reception. I believe it's that way down the hall. I'll confirm exactly where. I'm sure we'll all find it. There'll be food and drinks. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all there.